A veteran worker of the SCP Foundation sits at his terminal, performing one of the most critical tasks in the entire organization, creating a file for an as-yet undescribed SCP. But there's something terribly wrong. His eyes are glazed over, his mouth hangs open. Is this a zombie or a trained Foundation researcher? What is going on? Like any large international organization, it takes more than just the exciting, action-filled jobs to keep the wheels turning at the SCP Foundation. Sure, the head researchers, guards, mobile task force soldiers, and members of the O5 Command get all the praise, but a legion of number crunchers, cleaners, and paper pushers are equally important. One such person was archivist Walter Bainbridge, who had been tasked with digitizing some of the older records that the Foundation had on file. It was when he was innocently recording the details on SCP-050 through 060 that he first came under the strange and startling effects of SCP-055. But the most peculiar part, as with all incidents of SCP-055's anomalous effects taking hold, is that Walter had no idea any of it was happening. In his new digitized filing system, he first took note of SCP-053, Euclid class, also known as the Young Girl. This anomaly was a seemingly normal human female child who provoked homicidal insanity in those directly exposed to her. Then SCP-054, Safe class, a non-aggressive humanoid female made entirely of, as well as biologically and chemically identical to regular spring water. Next, SCP-056, Euclid class, a being that changes form to suit its environment, but only when all observers lose focus of it. And then SCP-057, Safe class, an underground chamber that crushes the humans who walk within. It was at this point that Walter received a concerned message from one of his superiors at Site-19, Mr. Kovac. The message praised the thorough digitization of the other anomalies' records, but was confused about why Walter had left out any mention of SCP-055. Immediately, Walter was embarrassed. How could he have forgotten SCP-055? That iconic anomaly known for... well, he couldn't quite say off the top of his head, but he'd be sure to look into it. A quick trip to the Site-19 archive showed him that there was actually quite a hefty file on the nature of SCP-055, which must have been the result of a huge number of studies. What struck him as strange was that all the files were filled out in pen rather than being typed up like a traditional file. The majority of these notes were written in shorthand too, as though they were frantically taken during the tests themselves on extremely short notice. There weren't even any redactions. Walter made a mental note of what he had seen, put the file back in its proper place, and headed back to his computer terminal. However, after writing in an almost trance-like state, he looked back on his work to see that he had written an entry on SCP-058, a giant evil bovine heart with insect legs and a scorpion stinger. Strange, he thought. That's when Walter got a call from Mr. Kovac on his Foundation-issue phone, and he didn't sound happy. He'd given Walter direct instructions to go back and digitize the files on 055, and instead he'd been working on 058. What was the meaning of this? Walter was typically an extremely loyal and diligent employee, but the verbal barrage from his supervisor had him considering talking back, just this once, and hoping it didn't get him demoted to D class and thrown into 682's acid bath for playtime. Walter gulped, picked up some courage, and interrupted Mr. Kovac's rant to ask if he had any idea what SCP-055 actually was. The line went silent for a moment, then his supervisor spoke again, this time with less confidence. Of course I can tell you about SCP-055. It's a classic, one of the first 100. How could you forget it's, I think it's the one with, Another long pause as Mr. Kovac seemed to search for the words, but instead just trailed off into silence. Knowing that some of the anomalies on file were dangerous mimetic hazards, Walter was worried for a moment that he may have accidentally killed his boss by getting him to think too hard about SCP-055. He asked if Mr. Kovac was okay, and finally got a reply. I'm sorry, I seem to have zoned out for a second there. What were we talking about again? But this time it was Walter who couldn't answer. He had no idea at all what the two of them were discussing just moments ago. He felt disoriented and kind of sick, like they'd taken some low-level amnestics. Mr. Kovac told Walter to get back to his filing duties and they'd speak later. Walter then checked the messages he'd received from Mr. Kovac earlier, and there it was, plain as day. You missed 055. Go back and digitize that before proceeding, Mr. K. But Walter had never even heard of an SCP-055 if such an anomaly even existed. What was going on here? In that moment, Walter realized he was dealing with something much stranger than just a standard digitization job. After all, how could he properly complete his duties if SCP-055 seemed to be impossible to speak, write, or even think about, unless he were directly observing it at that moment? Walter had to know, and ask around the entirety of Site-19 to find the answers if he had to. Sadly for Walter, he was about to embark on a much more challenging task than he could have ever imagined. To paraphrase a supposed quote from Socrates, "All I know is that I know nothing." And that's also about the extent of the knowledge we have on SCP-055, also known as the anti-meme and the self-keeping secret. What does it look like? When and how was it obtained by the Foundation? What are its anomalous abilities? Is this thing dangerous? We may never know, because the only anomalous ability of SCP-055 that we're aware of is the fact that nobody is capable of retaining any information about it. It's crucial to note that whatever 055 is, it isn't invisible or indescribable. Foundation personnel are perfectly capable of entering its containment chamber and observing it without incident, but mere minutes after leaving the chamber, any memories of the particulars of 055 seem to spontaneously erase themselves. Hence, the self-keeping secret. But this didn't deter Walter. Perhaps his greatest advantage was that he didn't know enough about the thing he was investigating to know how futile his mission was. He wanted to know the unknowable, and a pesky issue like impossibility wouldn't stop him. He'd get to whoever he needed to at Site-19 to get the answers he needed. Of course, most people had no knowledge of the mysterious anomaly. The common response he got back from his colleagues was, 055? Do we even have a 055? While the realization of sudden memory loss, or the realization of 055's existence, has been known to cause momentary stress, there are no known long-term physical or mental effects from 055's anomalous abilities. It's a fleeting idea in its purest form, like forgetting why you walked into a room. 055 could be the most harmless object on the Foundation's roster, or the most deadly. Either way, we just don't know. At times, Walter worried he was going insane. 055 and everything related to it was gaslighting him. Was 055 even real? The one thing that proved to him that 055 must have existed is that its containment chamber existed. According to the official records kept by the Foundation on the Site-19 containment facilities, 055 is kept in a 5x5 by 2.5 meter square room, constructed of 50-foot thick cement, with a Faraday cage surrounding the cement walls. The report continues that access is via a heavy containment door measuring 2 by 2.5 meters, constructed on bearings to ensure door closes and locks automatically unless held open deliberately. 055 cell is one of the few to have no posted security guards, and any personnel working on other SCPs in the area are ordered to remain at least 50 feet from the geometric center of 055 cell, where the anomaly itself is kept. When he tried to explore further why the cell was constructed in this manner, he found that, surprise surprise, nobody knew. 055 was an anomaly whose containment requirements were so mysterious that it automatically netted itself a Keter class designation. After all, how can you properly contain something you can't even hope to comprehend? There were plenty of rumors about the true nature of 055. Some of the more conspiratorial minds at Site-19 theorized that 055 was actually an autonomous or remotely controlled spy inserted into the site to observe Foundation operations, or even humanity as a whole. If you're on the more paranoid end of the psychological spectrum, this theory makes total sense. An anomaly that's physically impossible to remember, even when writings and pictures on the subject exist, would be a perfect spy. However, this was all ultimately little more than speculation. Walter was barely any further along than when he started. There were multiple points in his investigations where Walter seriously considered giving up, until finally, he had a major breakthrough. Dr. Bartholomew Hughes and Dr. John Marichek were two scientists that had performed extensive research into 055, and who, Walter hoped, might have the answers he sought about the self-keeping secret. These scientists were the first to discover the anti-memetic nature of 055, performing numerous tests on D-Class personnel to see if it was possible to create feasible written records, sketches, or any other records or impressions that could bypass its anomalous effects. The disorienting, memory-ruining effects of 055 also extend to any materials concerning 055. It seems to be a truly uncrackable code, but Dr. Hughes may have finally found some cracks in the armor. For starters, the fact that we're able to remember that 055 is an anti-memetic is an ironic exception to its anti-memetic qualities. This revelation also inspired another realization from Dr. Hughes. Would it be possible to discover more about 055 from the process of deduction rather than the typical induction? In other words, could they possibly learn about 055 by figuring out all the things it isn't, rather than what it is? Dr. Marichek designed an experiment with Dr. Hughes to explore this theory. They designed the experiment around a simple question: is 055 not spherical? In designing the question to specifically find out what 055 isn't, they hoped to subvert the anomaly's anti-memetic powers. Walter was fascinated by this potential method of getting answers. Marichek and Hughes found that, while the questioning process for those exposed was often arduous and frustrating, they could now definitely say that 055 is not a sphere. It is theoretically possible to discover the true nature of 055 by an almost endless barrage of deductive questions, though whether Command would authorize the resources for such extensive testing is still an open question. Walter, in his desperation, begged Marichek and Hughes for clearance to view 055 himself. The curiosity had become too great during his search to just walk away with the single fact that 055 wasn't spherical. He needed to see this thing. And after several weeks of filling out forms and cutting red tape, his wish was finally granted. Walter Bainbridge was allowed a private audience with SCP-055, the subject of his months-long obsession. Outsiders observed that Walter spent just over an hour in the containment chamber, taking photos, drawing sketches, writing down notes, recording audio logs, and reciting memory mnemonics. He was pulling out every stop to counteract the anti-memetic effects of the self-keeping secret. He was adamant that he would not be defeated by his non-spherical nemesis, not after all this time and effort. Once his time in the 055 containment chamber was over, he retired back to his office to finally digitize his exhaustive findings, so that his supervisor, Mr. Kovach, would finally get off his back. Walter smiled, took a deep breath, and began to type. SCP-059, Keter Class. This anomaly is a radioactive mineral that emits a unique radiation known as delta radiation. Exposure to this radiation has caused strange fungal growths on the infected... Wait, what was this supposed to be about again? Oh well, it couldn't have been that important. Feeling hungry? Maybe you could go for a snack right about now, or a nice refreshing can of your favorite soda. Perhaps if you've got some change burning a hole in your pocket, a nearby vending machine would be a good choice. And trust us, there's no vending machine like this one. SCP-261 will give you a treat that's out of this world, or rather, out of this dimension. That's how this safe class anomaly earned its incredibly accurate name, the Interdimensional Vending Machine. It was first discovered in a dark alley in Yokohama, Japan. Japan is a place where you can find a number of strange and surprising things in vending machines, but nothing quite like this. The Foundation was first alerted to its presence after one of their web trawlers noticed some interesting chatter on Japanese online message boards about a magic vending machine. To these Japanese forum users, it sounded like a fanciful urban legend, a vending machine where you could get something truly fantastical if you have the yen to spare. But upon thorough investigation, field agents of the SCP Foundation discovered that the machine was no legend. and brought it into containment. It's the kind of thing you wouldn't look twice at. An utterly generic black vending machine with no viewing window and a handwritten sign in Japanese that reads, "Out of order." But what the vending machine looks like isn't nearly as interesting as what it's capable of. When you insert your money into the machine, and it's important to note that it only accepts Japanese yen, the machine will dispense some kind of snack, food, or drink item. However, over time, the more the machine is used in a single day, the more bizarre the items it spits out will become. Foundation researchers have attempted to figure out how the machine works, but their task has been incredibly difficult so far. It doesn't appear to contain any snacks, and it doesn't seem to be made of any anomalous parts. Moreover, the machine simply won't work when the front panel is opened, or when any surveillance equipment is placed inside. In other words, it's pretty much impossible to look this gift horse in the mouth. Strangely, the machine is also capable of working without power, though when unpowered, the vended products are likely to become stranger much faster. But let's be honest here, you're not here for Vending Machine Mechanics 101. You want to hear about all the weird stuff that SCP-261 dispenses, and frankly, we're with you on that one. Lucky for all of us, this is one of the anomalies that the Foundation has truly extensive test records on, providing us with a highlight reel of some of the strangest, wildest, and downright most interesting snacks and drinks straight out of another dimension. Bon appetit! Let's start off nice and easy with some of the snacks and drinks that are not only edible but also sound like they'd actually be pretty tasty. Like Pepsi Dragon Twist, a bottle of Pepsi soda with English packaging that tastes like dragon fruit. PepsiCo does not produce such a product, but honestly we wish they did. Same for Dark Side Cola, a clear liquid that becomes jet black shortly after being opened, which apparently tastes like your average can of Coke with a touch of spice thrown in. But hey, not everybody likes cola. Maybe you're a maverick, a rebel. Only a soft drink with a formal title can quench your thirst, and as such you prefer Dr. Pepper. In which case, maybe the vending machine will furnish you with an interdimensional Japanese product known as Dr. Pepper's Amusing Straw. This spatial anomaly wrapped inside a whimsical Dr. Pepper branded straw seems to contain far more liquid than should be able to fit in the straw. About 1 bottle's worth of soda, to be precise. A nice and convenient solution for whenever you need to get the fix that only an accredited doctor of popology can provide. And if you fancy something from the more intoxicating end of the beverage spectrum, for 600 yen you can get yourself a rare bottle of Billy Beer. It's just the thing for those who weren't alive during the Carter administration, but still want to try brew that was endorsed by the younger brother of President Jimmy Carter. This anomalous bottle of suds, which was bottled in the 1970s according to its label, came with a note reading, "I had this beer brewed just for me. I think it's the best I've ever tasted, and I've tasted a lot. I think you'd like it too. Billy Carter." Drinking the beer got a D-class intoxicated for 72 hours. But what if you've just wet your whistle and worked up a hunger in the process? Thankfully, SCP-261 has some delicious interdimensional food to satisfy your cravings. So for starters, how about a tube of the Little Bakery 7-grain? This small aluminum tube lets you squeeze out a blob of dough, which instantly rises and cooks itself into a tasty little loaf of bread. Testing has indicated that the bread is a little chewy, but still tastes completely fine. Not bad for a tubed baked good. How about some seafood to go with that bread? Then maybe for your entree, you can crack open a delicious pack of lemon clams. And we do mean crack very literally here. If you crack this bag of anomalous clams like a glow stick, they boil themselves. And once you open them, you're ready to enjoy a serving of tasty clams that have a slight lemon flavoring to them. Delicious. But if you're not that hungry and just feeling more like a snack than a full fancy dinner, the machine once put out the Lay's Bloomin' Onion. While it appears to be a normal onion, each layer of the onion is a different flavor of chip, leading all the way into the middle. Truly a gourmet snack with more layers than, well, actually exactly as many layers as an onion. And what about for those who are anomalously trapped in the year 2012 and are looking for a snack that is both tasty and meme-worthy? Well, you'd be lucky to receive a 700 yen bacon shirt. It's exactly what it says on the can, an edible shirt that both smells and tastes like bacon, and has no real side effects other than making you smell a little like bacon while you're wearing it. Though this could be a dangerous anomalous effect if you decide to walk through your local dog park while you're wearing it. We've been told it pairs well with the meat hat, teriyaki fedora, a size 64 trilby-style fedora made entirely out of teriyaki-flavored beef jerky. The object came flattened in a cardboard box bearing the tagline, "You can have your hat and eat it too," which is a pun that probably makes a lot more sense in their dimension. Still a bit hungry? Well, lucky for you, this magical vending machine has got you covered on dessert too. For 700 yen, the Foundation was given an entire edible chess set, with each of the ornate pieces carved from what seemed like hard Pez-style candy. It's less checkmate and more check-ate. Another pun that I promise is funnier in another dimension. And for 300 yen extra, you might walk away with a candy robot playset. These are more hard candy components that can be put together to create functional, anomalous mini robots that move on their own, walking aimlessly and bumping into walls. But what about the full meal craving consumer on the go? Who wants both a dinner and a dessert combined into one disgusting package? Don't worry, the interdimensional vending machine has got you covered. Just 400 yen can net you some delicious turdokochakan. These are balls of fried turkey filled with chocolate, a smaller ball of duck, more chocolate, and in the very center, a small ball of fried chicken. Even the labeling on the product describes it as having 450% of an adult human's daily recommended fat intake. We'll leave it to you to decide if this is a decadent treat worthy of the gods or utterly disgusting. Maybe you're feeling a little cheeky though, or you need the perfect comedic dessert for your bachelorette party. The vending machine has a candy direct from an alternate Korea, a tasty, if slightly too sweet, chocolate candy shaped like a certain male organ, filled with, we kid you not, liquid white chocolate. Perfect for anyone who has both the sweet tooth and the sense of humor of a 12-year-old. Okay, these were definitely all weird treats, but let's get really strange now. From the disgusting, to the confusing, to the inedible, to the straight-up deadly. If you're a bit of a sadist, perhaps you're the kind of person who enjoys watching their snacks dying in front of them before they eat them. For that, the vending machine provides an aluminum box with a viewing window and a red button on top. Inside are a collection of small furry creatures, each with a single big eye. When the button is pressed, the creatures inside are abruptly superheated, cooking them all to death. At that point, the box opens, and the creatures are ready to eat. We've been told they were crunchy, spicy, and tasted a little like beef. Maybe you're part of the slow food movement. For that, we recommend the delicious pile of slugs, which is exactly what it sounds like. This is a produce box, like the kind used for packing strawberries, except it's full of live slugs. There are both advantages and disadvantages to actually eating these slugs. The advantage is that they contain large amounts of vitamin C, E, and most of the B complex, which are all crucial to a healthy and balanced diet. The disadvantage is that they contain large amounts of arsenic, which will kill you. Though, of course, if you still have a candy-flavored death wish, but you prefer your entomological treats a little more leggy, then may we interest you in a fine caramelized spider for a modest 500 yen. It's full of deadly quantities of an unknown anomalous venom that's pretty much impossible to cure, but it's worth it for the sweet, sticky goodness that comes before death sets in. Another strange item dispensed by the vending machine was a tall metal aluminum canister with a ring pull that, upon opening, had a violent chemical reaction with the air and triggered a large explosion. Apparently, this particular beverage was never intended for oxygenated environments. The blast killed 2 researchers and resulted in the temporary suspension of testing. Though in a slight silver lining for this fiasco, the testing area did smell of citrus for a few days, which the janitors must have enjoyed as they cleaned up all the body parts. Another dangerous snack provided by the vending machine was a long tube of chips called Prangles, not to be confused with any other long tube-based chips you may be thinking of. When the tube was opened, or popped as they say, the D-class that the chips were presented to began compulsively eating them. When researchers ordered the D-class to stop, it seemed almost as if they couldn't. Regardless of the orders given to them, the D-class just kept eating. Even when guards terminated the D-class there and then, the corpse continued to eat chips out of the tube until it was physically pried out of their hands. But if all those salty Prangles had really worked up a thirst in you, perhaps you can wash them down with a delicious can of Cherry Bomb. an intense cherry-flavored drink dispensed by SCP-261 for 450 yen. When a D-Class sampled this delicious soda, they commented on it tasting strongly of cherry. A few moments later, their head exploded with the force of a stick of dynamite, coating everyone and everything around it in gooey head viscera. The resulting cleanup took an arduous 6 hours. But wow, was that cherry tasty. And finally, why not complete this anomalous vending machine feast with a 1,000 yen papier-mâché piñata, resembling a dead horse that comes ready to use with a baseball bat. Everyone who saw the piñata felt compelled to beat it mercilessly with the bat, until candy began to fall out. Many in attendance claimed that it was the 1,000th gift unleashed by SCP-261, and thus warranted celebration. Once the dead horse was thoroughly beaten, all cognitohazardous properties ceased. There's a joke somewhere in there, but for the life of us, we're not sure we can find it. Oh well, maybe it's in another dimension. Agent Carla Mendoza was one of the best field agents that Site-41 had ever seen. She was professional, cool under pressure, and when the situation demanded it, she could be a straight-up badass. During a Chaos Insurgency raid on the site, she'd single-handedly killed 4 different insurgents, the last one with her bare hands. During containment breaches, she'd always be the first one charging into the fray, her Foundation standard issue Beretta drawn and ready to fire. Agent Mendoza was so devoted to the job that she took up the site director's offer to start living on site, so she could always be there to help if an emergency situation unfolded. After all, when it all hits the fan, you want someone as utterly unshakable as Agent Mendoza on your side. The job had thrown the worst of the worst at her and she'd never even flinched. So surely nothing could scare Agent Mendoza, right? After a long day of kicking ass, taking names, and filling in the properly mandated amount of SCP Foundation debriefing paperwork, Agent Mendoza retired to her Site-41 quarters. She felt exhausted and sweaty, so before heading to bed to watch some wonderful SCP Explained videos on her phone, how kind, she decided to take a quick shower. The last thing she expected was for this particular shower to become, well, let's say, Hitchcockian. The water was running hot and clean, filling the air with steam. Agent Mendoza was lathering up her hair when she first heard the noise. Heavy, wheezing breaths coming from just behind the shower curtain. The second she heard it, Agent Mendoza felt a kind of brutal, crushing anxiety that she'd never experienced before. Like a hand was reaching into her chest and squeezing her heart. The self-defense training that had been encoded into her muscle memory over years of working at the Foundation kicked into effect. In a blind panic, she struck out at the shower curtain, causing it to sway outwards and land directly on the face of Mendoza's wheezing voyeur. Who or whatever it was standing right there, less than a meter away from the shower. The wheezing carved into Mendoza's ears like a butcher's knife. What an awful, monstrous sound. And despite the fact that the shower curtain obscured its face, she could still somehow see it. The way a defenseless animal can sense an approaching predator without ever locking eyes on it, and just somehow know that it's too late for them to escape now. Every training session, every achievement, every piece of battle-hardening experience, it all evaporated in the presence of that thing. Mendoza was so terrified she might as well have been a child. The monster just stood there beyond the curtain, its raw, fleshy face parted into a freakishly wide, yellow-toothed grin. She didn't know how, but on some deep primal level, she was aware that if this thing got its hands on her, something horrific beyond description would happen to her. She was too terrified to even move a muscle in its presence. She remained like that, standing in the shower and sobbing quietly for the next 3 solid hours, until the creature finally disappeared. When her colleagues found her, she'd experienced moderate scalding wounds from the hot water of the shower. It took several hours for Agent Mendoza to compose herself enough to share her story. A couple days later, Tim Ellis, a junior-level filing clerk, was found trapped in a Site-41 supply closet. He'd urinated in his Foundation-issued slacks and was in a state of borderline catatonia. When his superiors asked him why he'd been spending 2 hours in a supply closet on company time, He reported that it was because a monster had appeared outside the door when he was searching for a replacement stapler, despite never actually opening the door to see what was outside or call for help. Mr. Ellis said that he felt as though he would have had a heart attack if he actually opened that accursed door. He was able to provide a clear description of the monster. He said it was tall and emaciated, with reddish-brown skin that made it seem almost burnt or rotten. While it stood there and waited beyond the supply closet door, it let out the most awful wheezing noise, like an old rusty iron lung. But the image that Ellis seemed most fixated on was the monster's face, or lack thereof. Just a huge grinning mouth that covered up its entire head, stocked with an arsenal of massive yellow teeth. Ellis was visibly shivering as he talked about it. 2 incidents are an unpleasant coincidence, but 3 are a bona fide pattern, and it didn't take long for more sightings of this strange new anomaly, dubbed SCP-303 or the Doorman, to pop up across the site. It earned that name by always appearing behind some kind of doorway, or at least a movable divider, in the case of Agent Mendoza's shower curtain. Whenever it appeared outside a doorway, nearby Foundation personnel would report being struck with a sudden paralyzing terror that made engaging with the creature impossible. Attempts to call for help were also often stifled, as the very presence of the Doorman causes disruptions to electrical equipment. Whenever the Doorman manifests in your proximity, it's safe to say that it'll be commanding your absolute undivided attention. This was a particularly frightening case for the SCP Foundation, because it was one of the few anomalies bringing the fight directly to them. Most sentient anomalous beings would do anything to avoid getting captured by the SCP Foundation and contained in one of their high-security sites, full of experienced researchers and state-of-the-art equipment designed specifically to neutralize their effects. The Doorman, however, just seemed to take this as a challenge, turning even the most hardcore personnel on the site into gibbering wrecks with its mere presence. But the Doorman was just getting started. Agent Henderson had a frightening encounter in the break room. He was pulling a long shift and just wanted to grab some coffee creamer from the cabinet. However, as he approached the cabinet, he heard the telltale wheezing and that terrible, overwhelming terror set in once more. The Doorman was sitting inside the cabinet in a fetal position. He just knew it. Could this thing really appear just anywhere as it pleased, and keep people in or out until it decided to dematerialize and torment somebody else? When the creature finally dematerialized and the cabinet was examined, the coffee creamer was found to be missing, leaving Agent Henderson distraught. This was the first recorded instance of the Doorman stealing a physical item, but it would be far from the last. Henderson wondered whether the creature that had just humiliated him was sitting somewhere else now, sipping from a warm cup of joe, with its big, freakish mouth and laughing at him. But a few incidents after this, things would become considerably more serious. The Doorman was about to take its first life. Well, it isn't really that simple, if you want to get into the semantics of the thing. When the body of Dr. Barker was found inside the second-floor storage room after a spree of SCP-303 incidents, the question was naturally posed as to whether the Doorman had gotten more dangerous and finally directly attacked one of its victims. Not quite. There had only been one way in and out of the storage room, a secured decompression chamber, and the Doorman had appeared inside this chamber while Dr. Barker was in the storage room, effectively trapping him inside with the sheer terror it causes in its victims. He was trapped in the room for a grand total of 5 days, at which point he finally died of dehydration, and the Doorman demanifested shortly afterward. The staff of Site-41 scaled up their countermeasure efforts, hoping to discover more about and perhaps even trap and contain the infamous Doorman. Dr. Burroughs, Researcher Matthews, 4 members of security personnel, and 4 D-Class operatives formed a kind of strike team, ready for quick dispatches whenever the Doorman happened to manifest. It wasn't long before the creature appeared in a room on the first floor, but the team quickly intercepted its location, ready and eager to gather more data on the mysterious being that had been terrorizing them all for weeks. Dr. Burroughs ordered one of the D-Classes to open the door and look inside, but the D-Class refused out of fear. The doctor told him that if he didn't open the door, he'd be transferred to SCP-682 duty. The D-Class frantically shook his head and said, "I'd rather take my chances with the reptile than go in there." The doctor was getting frustrated. He told the D-Class that if he didn't open the door immediately, he'd be terminated right there on the spot. The D-Class still refused, saying that he'd take death over what the doorman would do to him if he stepped inside. Without hesitation, Dr. Burrows ordered one of the security officers to shoot the D-Class then and there. The shot was fired. The D-Class was terminated. Dr. Burrows then ordered a female D-Class who just witnessed this callous execution to open the door, or the same abrupt death would befall her. She still refused, then began to describe the awful things she believed the doorman would do to her if she went inside. Researcher Matthews was visibly shaken by the description. Dr. Burrows decided not to terminate this D-Class immediately. He instead wanted to see just how much pressure the doorman's anomalous fear-based resistance mechanisms could take. Another D-Class was given a combat knife, and also given the order to cut the female D-Class with it every time she refused an order to go inside. After 2 hours of repeated asking from Dr. Burrows, the female D-Class dropped dead from blood loss. At no point did she ever attempt to open the door. It seemed that in all the cases for those in the thrall of the doorman's anomalous effects, death is a truly preferable alternative to ever facing it head-on. It's worth mentioning that these tests were conducted back in the 1970s, before the formation of the Foundation's Ethics Committee, which explains why their methods feel a little needlessly cruel. Since then, the doorman has fully commandeered the second-floor storage room, the same one where it caused Dr. Barker's death. It only leaves the room to steal more items from around the site. These items have included a cryotube, 3 sets of standard Foundation surgical equipment, 2 D-Class research cadavers, 1 gasoline-powered generator, a variety of chemicals from the chemical storage areas, and, of course, poor Agent Henderson's can of powdered coffee creamer. The reason for the doorman taking an interest in these particular items remains unknown, but we can only assume that nothing good can come of it. And there you have it, folks, the strange, frightening, and eerily inconclusive tale of the doorman. All we can really say is that we're awfully glad he's fixated on bothering Site-41, because who knows what would happen if he widened his net to the rest of us. Thankfully, we won't need to think about that. Oh, that's odd. Can you hear that? I thought I was imagining it. Though come to think of it, I can't help but feel a little uneasy right now. Do you ever get that feeling that you're being watched? Wait, the door. There's something behind the door. Can you feel it? Can you feel its red flesh and rotten teeth pressing up against it, breathing, waiting? Can you feel it staring at you without eyes, looking deep into your very soul? Well, that's good, but just stay cautious, okay? After all, life has many doors, Ed boy, and you never know who or what will be waiting for you behind the next one. Picture this. You're out driving, visiting the more rural towns of your home country. It's been a long trip. Hours at a time or sometimes full days spent on the open road, with brief stops taken only for gas and snacks. Every time you hit the next town, you stop for the night, maybe book a day or two at a local hotel to rest. Then you're right back out on the road again. It's been a little while since you left the last town, and it's starting to get late. The sun is dipping behind the horizon, and pretty soon it'll be night again. You don't think it's a good idea to keep driving all through the night until tomorrow. You need to sleep. The one problem is, you don't know the highway you're on all that well, and the people at the last town didn't mention there being anywhere else to stay for at least a few more miles. But then you turn on the radio, accidentally tuning into some kind of locally produced tourism ad. Through the airwaves and the ever-growing evening darkness, you hear, "Welcome to Chalkland, a nice rural town with a population who just can't bear to leave. Located just off the freeway, you'll find our town is filled with all sorts of colorful folks who love nothing more than to greet new faces. From the moment you arrive, you'll see firsthand the Chalkland locals' love for art and expression. And we even encourage our younger residents to get in on the fun and let their creative flair show. Chalkland. Once you're here, you just won't be able to leave." Chalkland? You've never heard of the place. It wasn't on any of the maps when you planned out your route, and it doesn't even show up on your car's GPS. And what's more, the people at the last town you visited never said anything about it. They said the nearest neighboring city was much, much further away. Did they lie? Why wouldn't they tell you that this other town was closer? You spot a road sign up ahead, pointing towards the turn for Chalkland, and decide to try your chances. A good night's rest and you'll be back on the road. Or so you think. In any small town, there are bound to be secrets, local legends, ghost stories, even grudges between families that have lived there for generations. No matter how friendly and unassuming a place might seem on the surface, there's always bound to be something that people just don't talk about. The township of Chalkland, otherwise known as SCP-277, is no exception, hiding a fair few secrets of its own. Although the locals don't know it, they are living their seemingly ordinary lives under constant surveillance. Operatives of the SCP Foundation have been integrated among the townsfolk, embedded within the civilian population to monitor some of the strange happenings going on in this otherwise normal town. So why not take a walk with us through Main Street, down the avenues of Chalkland, as we draw your attention to some of the mysteries of SCP-277. The first thing you'll probably notice as you stroll around town are all the chalk drawings. They're everywhere, on the sidewalks and the outer walls of buildings, scribbled on trash cans and houses. Practically every playground in town has been turned into an urban art installation for these colorful children's drawings. Not at all that weird at first glance, right? Perhaps it's a good thing that the town encourages its kids to express themselves by having them draw all over the town with chalk. But these images coating the town, on every street corner and alleyway, they weren't drawn with chalk. These apparitions found throughout the area of SCP-277 might look like harmless art, but not one of them was created in the way you might expect. Little Timmy didn't spend a few minutes on his hands and knees dragging a lump of chalk over the concrete. Oh no. The drawings found around Chalkland seem to be projected directly from the minds of the town's children. All their thoughts, their wild and unfiltered imaginations have somehow been plastered all over every surface you can find. The Foundation calls these images instances of SCP-277-1, with almost all of them appearing as figures drawn in white outlines. Creepy, isn't it? Like part of a crime scene. Luckily, some of these projections take the form of beanstalks, spaceships, anything from the imagination of the child manifesting them. An instance of SCP-277-1 doesn't possess any physical form, or any substantial three-dimensional body, and the size, shape, and style and complexity of each drawing varies, all depending on the child that creates them. Additionally, it's only children that have the capacity to produce these images. Anyone over the age of pubescence is completely unable to do so. As for how exactly the children of Chalkland create SCP-277-1 instances, well, most of the time they aren't even aware that they're projecting their thoughts into the form of these anomalous drawings. It is an entirely unconscious and involuntary process. It's hard for the SCP Foundation to put an exact number on the number of children in Chalkland, given the sheer size of the town and its population. So, predicting the exact number of active instances of SCP-277-1s at any one time is pretty tricky, if not downright unfeasible. The Foundation agents embedded among the townsfolk have been able to confirm that these drawings or projections are capable of interacting with fellow SCP-277-1 instances, while physical objects can pass through them without causing or sustaining any form of damage. It is due to this factor that the children living in SCP-277 can often be seen playing with their chalk projections, and the existence of these living drawings is viewed as a totally normal and everyday occurrence by the adult residents of Chalkland. In fact, you can ask anyone who grew up living in SCP-277, any lifelong local born and raised in Chalkland, and they will tell you that the living chalk projections of the town's children have existed as long as the town itself has. According to the claims of the older residents, SCP-277-1 instances have been appearing in Chalkland for years and years, dating all the way back to when SCP-277 was first colonized and the earliest settlers arrived in the town. However, the Foundation isn't so sure that these claims are 100% accurate. For one, they can't even find a single record of SCP-277 existing before the 2000s. Even those living in neighboring towns refuse to believe that Chalkland is a real place that exists. Adding to the mystery surrounding the town of SCP-277 is the fact that all of its inhabitants also don't seem to exist, or at least have no official record of their existence anywhere else. According to tests conducted by the Foundation, The dental, DNA, and fingerprint data of everyone living in SCP-277 don't match any recorded persons on national population databases. And on top of that, none of the Chalkland residents have any memories of living anywhere else other than the mysterious town, or ever having traveled anywhere outside it either. No vacations, road trips, not even as much as a visit to relatives in the next town over. Naturally, before they implanted covert agents among the locals, the SCP Foundation's initial attempt to contain SCP-277 was to evacuate the civilian population. The plan was to remove the people from the vicinity of the town, relocate them, and then assess the local area's anomalous properties. What was it about that specific town that caused the chalk projections to manifest? Why were none of the residents' details anywhere on the national databases? And how could a single one of them never have once left the confines of Chalkland? Evacuate and assess. That was the goal. But naturally, things weren't as simple in practice. Multiple failed evacuation attempts were made, with some unforeseen incidences causing the operation to go awry. In an attempt to combat this, the SCP Foundation tried to vary the specific details of its evacuation strategy each time, but even then they couldn't get the people out of the town. What was perhaps far stranger was that every time the Foundation attempted a new evacuation, the civilians living in SCP-277 denied having any memories of the earlier failed evacuations. There was so much disbelief in the occurrence of these prior evacuation attempts that it caused the Foundation to question if these attempts even took place. The only record of the failed evacuations existing were in their own files. On the odd occasion that Foundation operatives were able to get one or two residents of SCP-277 far enough away from the town, they learned it was an exercise in futility. After spending any longer than a few brief minutes outside the borders of Chalkland, a resident would suffer some sort of violent incident. The exact nature of what would happen to them has been redacted. However, we know for a fact that they weren't killed just by leaving the town. Shortly after, these evacuated civilians would be found back within SCP-277, with no memory of ever having left the town. But what was causing all of these attempted evacuations to fail? What exactly was preventing the townsfolk from leaving? Well, the answers to these questions may be found in a unique instance of SCP-277-1, which are far more actively hostile versions of the chalk drawings that were collectively given the designation SCP-277-1-R. These instances first came about sometime before the Foundation started attempting to evacuate Chalkland. One of their agents, undercover within the town and monitoring anomalous activity, spotted a seemingly standard SCP-277-1 projection in the shape of a rabbit. It wasn't a drawing that had been noticed previously, so it wasn't present in any reports coming out of SCP-277. But yet, there it was, at the local library. None of the town's children admitted to being responsible for casting this new projection. Unusual, but not uncommon. After all, they are kids. Think about it. We're sure that as a kid you might have done something that you didn't fess up to when a grown-up asked you. Granted, you probably never cast a psychic projection onto a library, though. The Foundation agents within SCP-277 knew that the instances of the chalk drawings could often be good indicators of the psychological state of the child that manifested them. So they aimed to keep an eye out for any further SCP-277-1-R rabbits with a matching drawing style. Turns out the agents found plenty more of these rabbits. Before long, sightings of SCP-277-1-R instances had tripled in frequency since that first one appeared at the library. But what was it that made these projections different from the regular SCP-277-1 chalk drawings? Well, Agent Davis of the SCP Foundation witnessed a cluster of these rabbit projections across the street from a diner. They were silently watching people or cars that passed by at a nearby intersection. The rabbits didn't play like the other sketches. Suddenly, the agent heard a scream from a little girl. She had been playing with her own chalk drawings that took the shape of a pony with wings. Agent Davis turned around to see one of the rabbits attacking the little girl's sketch, practically consuming the drawing thanks to instances of SCP-277-1 being able to interact with each other. At the same time, the attack seemed to cause the little girl to suffer some form of seizure. All around, the rest of the rabbits were doing the same, seeking out other chalk drawings and devouring them. tearing them apart and causing the children that created their own SCP-277-1s to suffer the same seizure. Ultimately, any child who had their projection attacked by a rabbit collapsed soon after and slipped into a coma, with attempts to awaken them proving unsuccessful. 3 months later, all of the rabbit drawings seemed to have vanished, with no clue if they had come from a child or were created from the town of SCP-277 itself. The local civilians gave mixed responses when asked, some claiming to have no memory of the event that put multiple children into comas. Meanwhile, other townsfolk simply stated that this sort of thing happens in Chalkland every few years. SCP Foundation staff noticed that the residents of SCP-277 seemed to smile too wide when they explained this, as if their town was a fairy tale, and that the massacre was just a part of a happy ending. Still, if you're thinking of stopping at Chalkland, maybe it's safer to just keep driving. It was dark when you arrived at the office. Rain hammered down on the window pane, cold as death. Your therapist didn't expect a frantic call from you in the middle of the night, but he learned to take such surprises as they came. You called and drove over the second you had the dream. That terrible, terrible dream. He was sitting at his desk. When you entered the room, he gestured to the couch, encouraging you to take a seat and make yourself comfortable. Your heart was beating so hard you were worried it might break your ribs. Every time you blinked, you were getting flashes of the faces, those vacant, grinning faces, with wide eyes and mouths wrenched open, hanging slack. You hoped to whatever god or gods you believed in to never see those images outside of a dream. "What's been troubling you this time?" he asked. "I must admit, I'm getting a little worried about you. You seem so frantic over the phone." You tried your best to settle your breathing for long enough to speak, at which point you said the words you were hoping you'd never have to say again. "I had a dream about Cragglewood Park." You could almost hear the sigh your therapist was desperately trying to conceal from you. You'd been making so much progress, processing and working to move beyond that mysterious trauma, but then the dreams had come back, just as forceful and terrifying as they ever were. Your therapist asked you to recount it, just like he did so many times before. But of course, it's always the same. In the dream, you were a child, probably about 6 or 7, walking down a long, cobbled path, surrounded on all sides by these trees that looked like eerie amusement park animatronics. They had these big, rubbery faces, stretched into eerie smiles, like something off the cover of an old children's book. The Craggle trees. You somehow knew deep down in your heart that this was what the trees were called. This was, after all, Cragglewood Park. Those words, in whimsical cursive letters, were written on an aging sign somewhere deep in your mind. You could remember it as clearly as your own mother's face. And you weren't alone here in Cragglewood Park. There were other children, wandering down that cobbled road like a lost scene from The Wizard of Oz. The trees grinned and gyrated and sang up against a painted forest background. Wait, was it painted? Or did it just seem somehow unreal? The memories were getting hazy here. The same goes for the faces of the other children. They were smudged out, forgotten. Why were you here? Why were any of you here? And where were your parents in all this? But those thoughts were blotted out by the singing of those awful trees. You couldn't remember the words, but the music was so clear. The haunting notes of a calliope organ, like a collapsing memory of a day at the circus. You and the other children were all walking in the same direction, as though in a trance. What were you walking towards? The calliope only got louder with every step. A boy with a smudged-out face to the left of you tried to speak, but his words were muffled. You couldn't hear anything over the music and the terrible, garbled singing of all the animatronic trees. Then there were glowing lights and colors as you approached the end of the road. Something big, moving in time to the music. A grand, old carousel, slowly grinding to a halt to let on the next wave of children. You and the others just stood there and watched it. Moments later, half of the crowd of assembled children, the boy standing next to you included, began to step onto the carousel. The light got brighter and the singing got louder. By the time you reached the end of recounting your dream to your therapist, you realized that your cheeks were wet with tears. You told him you'd do anything to get the dreams to stop. Anything. Your therapist just nodded, and made a note in his journal. "I'll get in touch with someone who specializes in this kind of thing," he said. "Try to get some rest in the meantime. It can be detrimental to obsess about this kind of thing." But how could you not obsess? The second you got home, you did what you always did after having another Cragglewood Park dream. You went straight to the forums. After all, the most frightening thing about the Cragglewood dream was the fact that you weren't the only one having it. A number of people had congregated on a niche online paranormal forum to discuss their eerily similar experiences. Dreams filled with singing uncanny trees, half-forgotten children, and the hazy horrors of Cragglewood Park. Each member of the forum alerted the others whenever they had the dream again and threw any new information into the pot. They came from all over the world, different ages, backgrounds, and countries, making it impossible that they'd all actually visited a place like Cragglewood Park at some point in their past, and really the only thing they had in common, other than the dream itself, was the fact that they were all only children while in them. None of them could explain the dream. Perhaps with almost 8 billion people on Earth, it could be a coincidence that this handful would have these peculiar dreams. Perhaps that's all it was. Strange dreams. A few days later, a stranger arrived at your door, telling you that they were referred to you by your therapist. They heard about the dreams, about Cragglewood Park. In fact, they dealt with similar cases in the past, and if you'd be willing to answer a few questions, they may even have a viable treatment for the strange dreams that have been assailing you for years now. What could go wrong? Anything that could stop you from seeing those awful tree faces would be good. You relayed everything that you'd previously told your therapist, every detail of the dream, the rough number of times it reoccurred, and even the support group for the other sufferers that you frequented online. After you answered all of the stranger's questions, they told you that in order to seek treatment for your strange dreams, you would only need to show up at a nearby building and tell them who you are. They told you that this is a highly confidential and experimental procedure, so it would need to be kept secret. You sign a non-disclosure agreement and happily submit to all their conditions. You'll do anything to stop dreaming about Cragglewood Park, even agree to what you don't know is amnestic treatment from the SCP Foundation, or testing to see if erasing memories can suppress the Cragglewood Park dreams. You were among the first group of guinea pigs for that experiment. But hey, if it works, right? And for a few weeks, it did. You submitted yourself to regular amnestic treatment sessions at a local Foundation front business disguised as a legitimate medical center. You were skeptical at first. You'd tried every therapy and over-the-counter sleeping pill you could get your hands on. You tried meditation, regression, hypnosis, positive subliminals. Nothing had banished down the haunting dreams of Cragglewood Park. Those trees, those faces, those awful tinny songs. But to your immense relief, this new course of treatment seemed to hold strong. While taking the medication given to you by the Foundation, you got your best nights of sleep in years. A whole new world of comfort and peace. But then came a problem. There were supply issues. You'd need to take a few weeks off the course. And just as soon as you stopped taking the regular course of medications, the second your head hit the pillow and you drifted off to sleep, you were right back in Cragglewood Park. It wasn't fair. It just wasn't fair. Perhaps the nightmares would go on forever. You'd spend every evening with those other faceless children always wondering, who were they? What happened to them? Little did you know there were no supply issues. The Foundation just wanted to test the viability of amnestic treatment as a long-term solution to the Cragglewood Park dreams, or as they dubbed them, SCP-2571. Turns out the amnestics were only effective when the subjects of SCP-2571 were actively taking them. Given the Foundation tests have estimated around 0.05% of the world's population are affected by SCP-2571, with that number possibly on the rise by unknown means, consistent amnestic treatment for all affected was deemed to not be a viable solution. But if it's any consolation to you, you're not suffering alone. The SCP Foundation has an online bot known as I.O. Mandela, trawling the internet for any discussions relevant to SCP-2571. They also have a designated task force, MTF-57, also known as the Laughingstock, to investigate and follow up on cases related to the sinister Cragglewood Park. The Foundation has conducted thousands of interviews related to the subject, but only 3 are appended to the file, containing between them some revelations on Cragglewood Park that reveal it's actually far, far worse than a childish bad dream. Dr. Rayner, the research team leader for SCP-2571, conducted the first of the 3 pertinent interviews about SCP-2571, investigating the experience of one Rupert Ducasse. In many ways, Rupert's Cragglewood Park dreams were truly textbook ventures into this nightmare of an amusement park. He described venturing through the park saying, "I entered this theme park. It's like Disneyland but smaller. There's no rides, just this long winding road through the woods. Everything's bright and colorful like a cartoon. And then there's these trees all around me, but they've all got faces. And they're singing. They've got these dopey, cheerful looks, like in one of those old-time cartoons, right? And they just sing and laugh and sing." Like all the other accounts, he reported approaching a carousel with the other children. Half of the children got onto the carousel, and he and the others began to leave. At this point, Rupert became visibly distressed while recounting the tale and said, "Just as I'm getting ready to leave, I see something. A tiny tree sprouting up near my foot. It looks up at me. It's smiling with that big, dopey, happy grin. When I see it, that's when I start screaming. That's when I wake up." When Dr. Rayner asked Rupert why he started screaming, Rupert replied that the tree had his face. The interview concluded. Next, Dr. Rayner spoke to Janny Yearling, another victim of SCP-2571. Dr. Rayner shifted his line of questioning to the carousel specifically. Miss Yearling insisted that she never stepped onto the carousel herself. Some who did were smiling, others were crying. They hugged some of the children that chose to stay behind before they got on. The more she described what happened, the more distressed Miss Yearling seemed to become. She eventually broke down into mortified sobs from the recollection. When Dr. Rayner asked what was wrong, Miss Yearling said, one of the kids that got on. Why did he hug me? I don't even know who he was," before breaking down into horribly desperate, choked sobbing. The final interview, and what it led to, was the most eventful and disturbing of all. Why? Because this interview, conducted by Dr. Rayner with Randolph Blair, was the first time that a physical item in a subject's home proved that SCP-2571 may be much more than just a malicious dream. An old VHS videotape was found in Mr. Blair's attic, with the word Cragglewood scrawled across the top. When the Foundation made Blair watch the tape and asked him if he recognized any of the images in it, he told them that he only recognized them from nightmares. He theorized that perhaps he'd been shown the tape as a child, and it had traumatized him. The Foundation didn't think that was the case. Dr. Rayner pressed on and asked him about a few strange details, like the resemblance between himself and one of the 2 children in the video, and the strangely vacant front-facing bedroom in his childhood home. At this point, Dr. Rayner realized that Mr. Blair wouldn't be forthcoming for much longer. He decided to use that little time he had left to ask Mr. Blair one more question. Have you always been an only child? That question would forever go unanswered, but Dr. Rayner could now take an educated guess. The Foundation watched and analyzed the tape, finding it eerily similar to so many of the dreams that came before. A young Randolph Blair and another young child that the Foundation believed to be his brother wandered through Cragglewood Park with the others until they finally reached the carousel. There, Randolph said a tearful goodbye as his brother stepped up onto the carousel, knowing somehow that he would never be seen again. And as Randolph tried to leave in a panic moments later, he was cornered by another horrifying Craggle tree, this time with his brother's face singing in his voice. Because Cragglewood Park isn't a terrifying dream, it's a terrifying memory. It all started in 1983 with reports of human trafficking in the heart of Sin City. The FBI had gotten word of a potential trafficking ring operating out of an abandoned department store in Las Vegas, Nevada, and immediately began organizing a secret raid on the building. While they would indeed encounter something horrifying within that abandoned department store, it wasn't criminals or human trafficking. In fact, it wasn't human at all. This is the horrifying story of SCP-847. After weeks of planning, the raid on the department store was conducted in the dead of night. Agents covered all the exits and entrances, and a helicopter was stationed nearby in case anyone attempted to run. It should have been a perfect trap, but things never go as planned when you don't know what you're dealing with. The agents breached the door and began searching the darkened building. It didn't appear that there was any power, so the traffickers must have had great night vision and a high tolerance for creepy locales. Agents soon heard a faint humming sound coming from below, a generator. It must be located in the basement and be the hub of this criminal enterprise. Readying themselves for whatever they were about to find, the agents descended into the basement. As they moved deeper into the building, they found that lighting rigs had been set up. They must be getting closer to something, but that something was still a mystery. A senior FBI special agent was leading the charge, his pistol drawn and ready. It was quiet, too quiet. Did the traffickers already realize they were coming and clear out? He was ready to consider this bust a bust when he heard a quiet mewling in the distance, a persistent whining whimper that was undeniably human. He gave the signal to his fellow agents to follow the noise. They proceeded forward towards the pain sounds and found themselves in a wide, well-lit room filled with department store mannequins. All were broken to some degree. Some were totally smashed to pieces. Some were chained to walls and locked in cages. Others were wrapped in plastic. The agent wondered whether this was some kind of twisted joke or a messed up avant-garde art piece. That's when he noticed her. A single crouched figure in the distance, hunched over and whimpering in a darkened corner of the room near a full-length mirror. He couldn't fully make her out, but he got the sense that something was wrong. She was injured, bent over. Was she even missing an arm? Just what had these monsters done to this woman? He whispered a request for backup into his radio and pushed on. When he got within 50 meters of this strange woman, her demeanor changed entirely. She jerked around, her movements forced, erratic, and painful looking. The woman stared directly into the agent's eyes and began hobbling towards him, occasionally stopping to strike a pose as if modeling during a photo shoot. Just then, the agent made a horrifying realization. This thing moving towards them wasn't a woman at all. It was a living mannequin. As she got closer though, he realized that the mannequin's broken left forearm had been carved into a large shiv. A female junior FBI agent had been one of the many to pour into the room when the raid leader had radioed for backup. The second she entered the 50-meter range of this strange mannequin, everything changed. In an instant, its eyes and mouth began dripping with a thick, viscous resin. Its whimpering gasps suddenly became vicious, ear-splitting screeches, and it turned its gaze from the senior FBI agent. It was now focused on the junior agent, who had just entered the room and broke into a terrifying run straight towards her. The mannequin moved with a violent, single-minded purpose. Other agents began firing, but it was running freakishly fast and easily dodged most of the bullets. The few that actually hit seemed to do nothing to slow the creature down. It shrugged off the damage and kept running. With a great leap, it landed on the terrified junior agent and began jabbing her with its bladed arm. The other agents stopped firing, fearing they might accidentally hit their colleague during the panic. The mannequin was ruthless, clawing and stabbing with the strange resin leaking out of its every orifice. Terrified and unable to reach her gun, the agent remembered her training. She reached into her belt and grabbed her stun gun, jamming the two probes up against the creature's chest and giving it 30,000 volts. The creature spasmed, fell backwards, and collapsed in a heap on the ground, frozen. This was the first recorded encounter with SCP-847, a violent living mannequin with a serious problem with women. This terrifying report was passed up the chain of command until it landed on the desk of a Foundation agent working in the FBI. The Foundation quickly swooped in and claimed the mannequin, delivered necessary amnestic treatment to all who'd witnessed it, and closely observed the female junior FBI agent's recovery in a private hospital with Foundation ties. As it turns out, they were right to do so, as the junior agent was in for a gruesome fate. While the wound she'd suffered at the hands of SCP-847 didn't appear fatal, the fact that the mannequin's anomalous resin excretions entered the open wound changed everything. Several hours after being committed, the junior agent began complaining of limb stiffness and difficulty moving. This quickly developed into full paralysis. Over time, her skin and internal organs began to harden, until the process, dubbed plastination, came to a gruesome end. The junior agent wasn't just dead, she had been transformed into a mannequin. Foundation researchers were met with a truly horrifying realization. This means that all the other broken mannequins found with SCP-847 were likely once living humans, attacked and transformed by the anomaly, now a source for new harvested body parts. Now safely interred at a Foundation containment facility though, the real tests on SCP-847 to determine its behavior and physical attributes could begin. The most important detail about SCP-847 is that its aggression is exclusively directed towards women, as opposed to when it encounters men, and its instincts are more self-destructive. Through a series of tests and observations, researchers have been able to pin down 3 different distinct patterns of behavior for SCP-847. Pattern Z behaviors occur when there are no humans standing within 50 meters of SCP-847. The mannequin will seek out a full-length mirror and pose in front of it, much like a department store mannequin attempting to show off its clothes. It remains largely inanimate during these periods and will very occasionally use a finger or whatever appendage is available, given its habit for self-mutilation, to scratch messages on nearby surfaces. Pattern Y behavior occurs when male humans with XY chromosomes enter a 50-meter radius around SCP-847. Just like its reaction to the male FBI agents who found it, 847 will initially emit vocalizations that seem like whimpering gasps, before making eye contact and striking provocative poses while approaching the subject. It will then remain static and allow the male subject to pose its body. However, after the male subject leaves the area, 847 will enter a state of considerable distress and begin removing or shattering parts of its body. The Foundation has found that the parts removed or shattered are often consistent with parts that the male subjects found displeasing during interactions, showing a masochistic desire to impress. These parts are then harvested back from plastinated victims, which brings us to the most dangerous of its behavior patterns. Pattern X behaviors occur when female humans enter a 50-meter radius around the creature. 847 will immediately become brutally aggressive, switching its noises from whimpers to violent screeches and growls. 847 experiences enhanced physical capabilities during Pattern X states. Its speed has been measured at 45 kilometers per hour, making it as fast as the legendary SCP-096. It's also been shown to exhibit extreme physical strength. It's during this pattern of behavior that it begins excreting its deadly resin, which has been proven to only be dangerous to women. In these states, the only thing capable of reliably pacifying the being is a powerful electric shock. The shock causes the creature's resin to harden, temporarily incapacitating it for roughly 5 minutes. Other conventional weapons and damage has no meaningful effect on SCP-847. After a number of incidents that had sad and violent endings, the Foundation Ethics Committee forbade the use of female D-Class personnel in SCP-847 testing. When it came to female subjects, 847 always slipped into a state of extreme aggression, so instead the Foundation began testing with male subjects in hopes of better understanding the dynamics between human males and SCP-847. Various misogynistic D-Class males were introduced into the containment chamber, which was modeled to look like a bedroom for the purposes of behavioral study. Each one, either during or after their interaction with SCP-847, was told to comment on some aspect they felt dissatisfied with. The mannequin shattered its own chest after hearing it described as being out of proportion. After another D-Class called its nose ugly, the mannequin broke it off. After another said that its hair was out of fashion and commented on its inability to drink, it tore out its hair and liver. All parts were replaced after the experiments. Things took their most violent and upsetting turn yet with the introduction of D-7294. A lot of the time, D-Class personnel are considered to be as anonymous as they are expendable, but D-7294 is an exception. Before becoming D-Class, he was a successful cello teacher who brutally murdered one of his teenage students and her mother. He's typically employed in tests when the Foundation wishes to see interactions between anomalies and humans with confirmed psychopathic personalities. During his interaction with SCP-847, he belittled and humiliated the mannequin. He forced it into uncomfortable poses and even snapped off one of its fingers before being dragged from the room by Foundation guards. In the following debrief, He further berated the Mannequin as useless and lousy at its job of being controlled by him. In response, 847 extracted its own brains, eyes, and clavicle before shattering its own hands in dismay. So why does 847 behave this way? While it may appear monstrous, it seems that the reason SCP-847 does what it does is all too human. It hurts women because it itself is hurting, and it's willing to hurt itself even more for the approval of the objects of its desire. As a result, it's an anomaly trapped in an endless cycle of pain and violence. Perhaps one day, it'll be able to free itself from the loop, but that day is unlikely to come for this murderous Mannequin anytime soon. It was a beautiful September day, but Sean Taylor was trapped in his car in one of the worst cases of gridlock he had ever seen. He tried to look on the bright side though, and while he was stuck in an unmoving car, at least he had a pleasant view of the wide, shimmering lake just off the road next to him. He was admiring the scene when tiny drops of rain started landing on his windshield. That's funny. There wasn't a cloud in the sky a moment ago. There was something off about the rain though. It looked dirty, a rusty red color. Was that blood? He didn't have time to think about it, because just then a thick, dense mist began to roll over the lake, a fog of blood. Just off the side of the road, he could see a huge silhouette rising out of the water. Is that an old submarine? What Sean didn't know was that he was about to have an encounter with SCP-1861, also known as the HMS Wintersheimer, a ghostly submarine with strange and terrifying effects. Sean and the other drivers stuck in traffic that day were far from the first people to have a dangerous brush with this legendary vessel. According to SCP Foundation records, the HMS Wintersheimer has been appearing since as early as 1916. The first recorded incident occurred in the British seaside town of Innsmouth-on-Sea. You won't find this town on any maps or in the history books, and you're about to find out why. The 500 population of the town, which had already reduced by the wartime draft into the currently raging Great World War, awoke to red skies on February 6, 1916. Citizens left their homes to investigate, only to find their entire town had been enveloped in a thick red mist. The swelling crimson clouds up ahead began to rain, showering the town in a hail of viscous red goop. Anyone unlucky enough to taste it would say that this strange rain was a dreadful mix of salt and copper. This was because, as the Foundation would later determine, the rain and fog was a disgusting combination of salt water, human blood, and human cerebrospinal fluid. But the real threat was rising just beyond the beach. Technically speaking, the HMS Wintersheimer vessel is designated as SCP-1861-A. It appears to be a World War I era British B-class submarine, designed by Vickers for the Royal Navy in 1904. By 1916, this particular type of boat was already on its way to being obsolete, and were largely deployed in Malta, far from the active fronts. So one of these vessels appearing on an otherwise unremarkable stretch of English coastline should have been a clue that something was terribly wrong. But the poor residents of Innsmouth-on-Sea didn't know the half of it. Soon, figures in what appeared to be archaic diving gear began emerging from the Wintersheimer and made their way into the township. They seemed terrified, running up to and frantically screaming at any local they could find. "Please listen to me. Something terrible is about to happen here. We need you to come with us or you're all going to die. You must believe us." The locals were frightened by what they heard. They'd been listening to news reports of the Great War unfolding across the globe for 2 years now. Had it finally come to them? They pictured shells raining down from the sky, decimating their defenseless little town in a rain of fire. The Navy must have been brought in to save them before the German bombardment began. While some took more convincing than others, the men in diving suits, known as SCP-1861-B, eventually managed to persuade the entire town to join them and lead the townspeople down to the water. One by one, they were all boarded onto the submarine, hundreds of them. Many couldn't believe their eyes as they watched scores of people disappear in front of them into the dark bowels of the Wintersheimer. Where were they all going? How would they all fit in there? But it was too late for any of them to back out now. The vessel submerged once more, and everyone was gone. The entire population of Innsmouth-on-Sea had disappeared in a rain of fog and blood. never to be seen again. The Foundation wiped all records of the town from existence and delivered appropriate amnestic treatment to anyone who still mentioned or remembered Innsmouth-on-Sea. The fate of those who board the HMS Wintersheimer is always the same: vanish from the face of the earth, explained away by the Foundation as accidental death by extreme weather event. There have been hundreds of documented sightings of SCP-1861, and the anomalous weather event can occur near any body of water wide enough to accommodate SCP-1861-A's comms tower and topmost platform. Depth does not seem to be any hindrance of the submarine appearing, and it can even manifest in water that's just a few inches deep. As Sean and the other unfortunate victims of the rush hour traffic were being showered in thick red droplets from above, a crimson mist rolled in between the cars. Sean had heard of so-called freak weather events before, like raining frogs and fish, but this was something different, and it frightened him. He could see now that the silhouette rising from the lake really was an old submarine, and he watched as a legion of mysterious figures disembarked from the vessel and began spilling onto the road. The men in ancient-looking diving suits walked among the cars, and one of them approached Sean's car. He began tapping frantically on the window, and Sean could tell he was yelling something. Sean was scared and more, but more than anything else, he was confused. Against his better judgment, he rolled down the window just a crack to hear what the man was saying. His British accented voice muted by the diving suit, the man frantically told him, "Sir, please listen to me. I'm Lieutenant Samuel Ramsey of the HMS Wintersheimer. We're evacuating the area. Please, you've got to come with me. We're in danger out here." HMS? Sean thought. Isn't that what they call British ships? What was a British submarine doing in the middle of a lake in the United States? Through his windshield, Sean could already see other men in diving suits leading people from the cars out towards the submarine. Something had to be going on here, something big. Lieutenant Ramsey was still banging away at the glass of Sean's window, becoming increasingly agitated. "Sir, if you won't comply with my orders, I'm within my rights to take you by force for your own safety." Sean could feel the fear setting in, but he didn't know what else to do. He turned off the car and took off his seatbelt. He was just about to open the door when there was a tap on the passenger side window of his car. It was a soldier in what looked to be advanced tactical gear. There were several soldiers directing cars to drive on the shoulder to get around the mess of stopped automobiles. Sean looked to his left, and the man in the diving suit was gone. The soldier tapped again, and Sean didn't need to be told twice. He followed his directions and drove around the traffic jam and out of the mist. A half-mile down the road, Sean was stopped by another group of soldiers and given an amnestic. He drove away, never knowing how close he had come to vanishing in the bowels of SCP-1861-A. Sean was lucky that one of the SCP Foundation's mobile task forces had taken over the situation, but they were too late to help those who had already complied with SCP-1861-B's orders and boarded the Wintersheimer. The task force made it their business to save whoever they could, but that wasn't their only directive. The Foundation had recorded a huge number of SCP-1861 instances since 1916, and now they were finally going to figure out what was going on inside. The Foundation had already discovered that those taken onto the Wintersheimer don't simply disappear. Once on board the submarine, they are forced into a diving suit of their own, which transforms them into new instances of SCP-1861-B. Upon realizing this, Foundation scientists devised an ingenious plot. 6 months before this latest instance of 1861, the Foundation dispatched 2 members of D-Class personnel who were familiar with one another into the Red Mist. One was instructed not to interact with SCP-1861-B, while the other, named Sal, was ordered to enter the submarine. His mission was to report back all findings to Foundation researcher Dr. Clutch during the next 1861 event. The D-Class who remained on shore was brought in once more by the Mobile Task Force during the September event that Sean witnessed. They checked each diving suit wearing Anomaly until they heard a familiar voice, muffled by the mask. It was Sal, and he'd been transformed into an instance of SCP-1861-B. The human D-Class, receiving questions from Dr. Clutch via remote broadcast, commenced the interview of his former friend. It is from this vital interview that much of the Foundation's knowledge of the mysterious HMS Wintersheimer is drawn. According to Sal, The interior of the Wintersheimer, which is a long, narrow passageway, is a spatial anomaly that seems to stretch on forever. This explains how vast number of people, like the entire population of Innsmouth-on-Sea, can disappear into the submarine at once. Sal reported that, about an hour after entering the vessel, the hatch closed and the interior began rapidly filling with water as the submarine descended. Prisoners of the Wintersheimer were faced with two choices: suit up or drown. Few chose the latter option, and as soon as the suit was on, the transformation had begun. As soon as everyone was suited up and the submarine had fully descended, causing the 1861 weather event to dissipate on Earth, the Wintersheimer had effectively entered an alternate dimension. The airlock opened, and the new recruits were instructed to step outside and take a look around. The Wintersheimer veterans informed the new sailors that everyone on land was likely already dead by this point. When Sal first exited the submarine, he commented on everything around him looking eerily similar to how it looked on land before the mist descended, but with one key difference. It seemed as though everything was underwater. Well, not quite that. It was almost as though everything was water, like the world had taken on a kind of flowing liquid state. Sal and the others existed in this otherworldly land of living water for 6 months, and as the months passed, things only got stranger. They found that they neither needed to eat nor sleep. According to Sal, all they did was breathe and pass the time by exploring and talking to one another. Anyone who attempted to take off their suit would dissolve and diffuse into the same liquid that surrounded them. Dr. Clutch asked Sal about the other inhabitants of this alien realm, and this was when things got truly disturbing. There were dead humans and animals floating all over the place, missing their eyes as though they'd been scooped out, and missing their mouths, as though they'd been bitten out of their face by some kind of huge predator. Their empty eye sockets bled constantly, and Sal theorized that this may have something to do with the anomalous blood mists of SCP-1861. When asked to provide more information on why all the corpses were mutilated in this way, Sal said that one of his superiors on the Wintersheimer told him, "The watcher of eyes and biter of teeth deemed them worthy." Whatever this mysterious being was, it seemed to be a powerful figure within 1861's water world, and Sal felt lucky that he never had a direct run-in with the creature himself. For his final request, Dr. Clutch asked Sal to attempt to remove his suit. The Foundation had learned in previous instances of 1861 that the diving suits have anomalous durability, and it was impossible for anyone other than the wearer to remove them. Hence why the Foundation could never deal with 1861-B by using brute force. Naturally, Clutch was interested in finding out what was going on underneath. Sal expressed fear and anxiety at first, wondering if after all he'd been through, whether he could ever be considered human anymore. Eventually, he was convinced to remove the suit, and his worst fears were confirmed. The second Sal removed his helmet, gallons of seawater poured out, and the now empty suit collapsed to the ground. Sal's body was never found. Only some teeth and a pair of eyes were recovered. The eyes were later confirmed to be belonging to a young girl, and the teeth were identified as having come from a European red deer. And so, the dark mystery of the HMS Wintersheimer continues. Because of the unpredictable nature of its appearances and the resulting difficulty of containing it, the Wintersheimer has earned a Keter classification. The only containment procedure currently employed by the SCP Foundation is for mobile task forces to try and intercept the submarine when appearances are reported, and hopefully prevent or at least reduce the kidnapping of civilians. With so many questions left unanswered, all we can say for certain is that if a red mist ever descends on you, and a stranger in a diving suit tells you you're in grave danger, he's absolutely right. We've covered a lot here on this channel, and what you might have noticed about the nature of our discoveries is that knowledge is best broken down before digested. Which is to say, if you are to learn how to assemble a computer, it may benefit you also to see one taken apart. When you do so, you'll notice in front of you not a computer at all, but a collection of individual parts. It's in understanding these distinctive parts in isolation that helps us shape our awareness of their marriage and how they cooperate with one another to become their collective self. Sure, this may be good in practice, but then tell me, how do we comprehend a whole that is composed of parts unwilling to isolate themselves from the rest? Because, let's face it, not all things, let alone SCPs, can be torn apart for the convenience of our study. No matter the subject we seek to understand, it may choose to resist our deconstruction by one way or another. Landmarks like the Temples of Malta and the Pyramid of Djoser are held together by our respect. Monuments like the Statue of Liberty are held together by copper. The family was held together by Charles Manson. But it's not always the preservation of history or elements of the periodic table or psychopaths that reject humans' wishes to disassemble. Far stronger than forces of nuts and bolts are that of character and loyalty, and SCP-2085 is welded together by exactly that. SCP-2085 is a militant anarchist organization consisting of 6 cybernetically enhanced individuals, A1 through A5, and B, operating under the name Kuroi Usagi Shiden, or more commonly known as the Black Rabbit Company. SCP-2085-A subjects are 5 adult female augmented humans, designated SCP-2085-A-1 through SCP-2085-A-5. Subjects are genetic chimeras, each with an estimated 6 to 10 different gene donors. They are fluent in Japanese, Mandarin, Chinese, Cantonese, Korean, Russian, and English, with additional languages varying by individual. Subjects display an array of genetic and cybernetic enhancements, including genetic splices of Felis catus physiology, that is, having cat-like ears, tails, and hair. These tails are prehensile and capable of holding small objects, so if you're accusing one of them of stealing your pen, don't just go searching their pockets. They also have grip pads on hands and feet, in case they ever did decide to retire from anarchy and take up surfing. Their impressive features don't stop there. If they haven't already put James Bond's gadgets to shame yet, just wait. Daniel Craig is about to look like Dora the Explorer. SCP-2085-A-1 through A-5 all have ocular implants with thermal vision, heads-up display, and recording functionality. Also noted are carbon nanoweave muscle fiber augmentation, reinforced endoskeleton, and brain-computer interface with internal hard drive. The list goes on, each etc. more elaborate than the next. Yet what stands out most about them is not a weapon, but an attitude. These 6 members, although now held in isolation from one another, do not show any signs of splitting up, not even when under the heavy pressure of the Foundation's interrogation. Agents spend their hours looking for cracks to dig their fingers into, trying to get one to betray the other and reveal sensitive information. But when asked to spill the beans, SCP-2085 screws the lid on tighter. They remain, as a whole, resistant to our deconstruction. The agents get nowhere with their investigation, and with each minute wasted, it's another victory for SCP-2085. The hours go on and they keep stacking up W's, building momentum day after day, growing stronger and stronger as a unit. As the Foundation tries to tear the group apart, they respond with even greater resistance. And this style of resistance is unique to each member. Imagine you are confronting SCP-2085-A-2. She is talkative, and so you think you might get somewhere. You are all ears. But what SCP-2085-A-2 sees isn't ears, but troughs, and she is happy to feed you her slop. She talks, and you listen closer and closer, but all you are getting is misinformation. False names, inaccurate stories, dates that don't add up. You focus and follow along, only to find yourself having run a marathon all the way to a dead end. Now you are faced with SCP-2085-A-5, who takes a different, more nonsensical approach. You are happy to no longer have to sit through inaccuracies to decipher truths, but now there are no truths at all. All that you are given are absurdities. She speaks in a way that makes you scratch your head, once saying for no apparent reason, "I take a hammer and I break my legs. I break 'em for the better." After so many scratches, you swear you've dug an inch into your skin. And so you move on to SCP-2085-A-4 hoping for better luck. She is straightforward with you, that much you like, but she's hostile and doesn't cooperate. When you ask her name, she raises her middle finger. She tucks it back in to create a fist, and then that fist punches the divider between you. No amount of reinforced glass could make you feel safe at that moment. cracks spread. It looks like a web spun by a spider, and you feel as small as one. Thankfully, a protective shutter is lowered. Aerosol sedatives are pumped into the containment unit. She continues to try to escape, yelling profanities even harsh for someone locked behind bars. Your ears have taken a beating from curse words, nonsensical rambles, and heaps of misinformation. You want to lower your head into a toilet bowl and hear nothing but water. Yes, that is where these women have driven you. Your head to the bottom of a toilet bowl. You have put in so many hours, and yet you have learned nothing new. And if you can't learn anything new, you might have to rely more on what you already know. But what do you know? Well, you know this. Their track record is quite impressive. Verified operations include smuggling, theft, assault, vandalism, kidnapping, extortion, property damage, possession of fissile materials, corporate sabotage, embezzlement, identity theft, fraud, copyright infringement, piracy, possession, transport, and sale of anomalous items, and, of course, tax evasion. Yet, when grilled under the heat of investigation, they do not reveal any details about the nature of these operations. You just know that they happened. All that is told is that SCP-2085 navigates in such a way as to minimize the chance of civilian casualties and maximize material and morale damage to their target. They are proud of this. It seems as if SCP-2085 perceives themselves on the side of good. While their list of operations on paper look like crimes, they stand proudly behind them, pleading guilty with a grin. But behind every smile is more teeth. Teeth that go beyond saying cheese. Teeth hiding in the dark caves of a sealed mouth. And you are determined to play dentist and find your way in. But SCP-2085 doesn't say for just anyone. So how are you to understand a group that resists our preferred methods of learning? How are you to properly assess the pieces of a puzzle when the puzzle is glued tightly together? It starts at the top. Before you can decipher the motives of a nation, you'd be smart to study their leader. And if you want to extrapolate the schemes of a football team, you'd interview the coach. And to truly know the moral of a television show, you'd be better off asking the creator than the actors. All of this is just to say, if you are to ever understand the complexities of SCP-2085, it is necessary you begin with SCP-2085-B, the person pulling the string of the entire operation for all of these years. Now you might be imagining a man of many muscles, someone able to fight a bear with an arm tied behind his back, someone who kicks through saloon doors, tilts back his liquor, and walks out with a woman in each arm, or a catgirl. But you'd be dead wrong. SCP-2085-B, also known as Wizard, does not look like an imposing lead at first glance, or even at the 100th glance. He is generally in very poor health, and his face shows it. He suffers from a variety of illnesses, most notably a vitamin D deficiency, acute radiation syndrome, and has unmanageable scarring from severe and repeated skin ulceration. He doesn't wear a cape and glamorous spandex often found hanging in superheroes' closets, but instead he wears an advanced crew escape suit, accompanied by a cheap bathrobe and flimsy red felt wizard's hat. He looks, with no elegant way of putting it, like a dork, a goofball, a doofus. You get the point. Furthermore, he is an adult male human with certain cybernetic and genetic enhancements. He has an adaptation of the gastrointestinal tract to allow for an all-liquid diet. Within his suit, an esophageal input port and waste output port are integrated. It is equipped with modifications to regulate sweat, reduce abrasion damage from extended usage, and aid in skin regeneration. His genetic enhancements include the replacement of 11 previously missing digits on hands and feet, and also has an internal drug pump, typically used for painkillers. Because, as we are about to learn, SCP-2085-B is most often on the wrong end of pain. Notice these modifications are not those you would find in a science fiction novel, but more likely behind the trench coat of a suspicious man in a dark alley. And we all know nothing good is ever concealed behind a trench coat. But have you ever wondered if that truth also extends to robes? Because when we pull open SCP-2085's, what we find is truly terrifying. SCP-2085-1. SCP-2085-1 is a fibrous mass of self-replicating carbon nanomaterials within SCP-2085-B's chest cavity, with growths protruding into the liver, pancreas, gallbladder, spinal cord, and left lung. The growth of the SCP-2085-1 and its consumption of SCP-2085-B's body tissues has been impeded through the addition of various containment implants used to sever communication between growth sections and control nodes and counter the replication process. SCP-2085-1's rate of replication without the influence of these containment implants is unknown. SCP-2085-1's periods of activity occur on average once every 3 months. The process lasts for up to 15 minutes and causes SCP-2085-B intense pain. Imagine a heart attack. Imagine Mike Tyson using your sternum like a punching bag. Imagine a cactus strapped to your front. This is the pain and torture SCP-2085 wears daily. There is no S logo printed on his chest like Superman. No symmetrically slick symbol like Batman. Instead, just cancerous growth. Kryptonite worn like a tie. The knot never to be loosened. But to SCP-2085-B, this anomaly is not just a number to be studied, but more so a being to be understood. It is more personal than a medical condition. It is something that he wakes up with each and every day. He calls it Red. At first, the Foundation saw SCP-2085's close connection with Red to be childish and silly, as if a small boy who names his freckles out of boredom and loneliness. But as you are about to see, how they met was more memorable than first finding a freckle in the mirror. A meteor struck down, and SCP-2085-B was the only person at the scene. Red was inside. As Wizard approached the meteor, Red leapt onto him and buried a home into his chest cavity. Far from a freckle on the skin, Red is a cancer. It grows and grows, leaching to what it can. It can't be removed with surgery. It can't be covered by a band-aid. It has no empathy or mercy. It leeches on and eats away at its host. But it's more than pain that it causes. Falling off a swing set and bursting open your leg hurts, sure, but at least both you and your injury are on the same team. Cuts try to heal. When left alone, injuries make effort to find homeostasis. But Red is a different breed. It hates us in a way that injuries are incapable of doing. It has a deep disdain for humanity. It tears Wizard down, reveling in his degradation. Its sole purpose is to eat him whole. Wizard can only take this personally, as he doesn't just feel the universally understood sensation of pain, but also the unique passion of its purpose. SCP-2085-B's adventures with Red seem to be where our story begins, and what ultimately keeps it moving. In fact, it was while SCP-2085-B was running around trying to fix his chest with implants when he eventually met who we refer to as SCP-2085-A-1 through A-5. He was at the clinic to get some new parts, and when he was going through the installation process, there was an explosion. One of the 5 girls barged out of a building, guns blazing. He started running alongside them with his chest half open. The woman embraced him immediately and reciprocated. Knowing nothing of the situation, he instinctively knew to take their side. There were bullets coming from both directions, but he intuitively understood which side was good and which side was bad. A distinction SCP-2085 believes the world needs help clarifying. But it is hard to see a reason for a war when our eyes are focused on the casualties. Beliefs are less clear when tucked behind bullets. The sounds of gunfire muffle their message. Morality, while a complex subject, SCP-2085 believes is simplified by the masses. Events are deemed good or bad based on the term used for them in a court of law. When we see the words smuggling, theft, assault, vandalism, corporate sabotage, embezzlement, identity theft, fraud, copyright infringement, piracy, and, of course, tax evasion, it is our impulse to label those as morally bad. But SCP-2085 desperately wants you to look beyond the language. They want the words to dissipate off the paper, letter by letter, until all you have is a blank page. Now look at the pencil and the hand that holds it. Watch how it moves. That is what matters. Whether it draws weapons or mermaids is irrelevant. Both can be used for good. Both can be used for evil. Intent is everything. And SCP-2085 intends on making the world a better place. Or so they like to claim. But maybe there is more to it. After SCP-2085-B and the 5 women escaped the gunfire, they went on to steal a boat and hightail it out of Japan. They spent their nights out there on the ocean, stargazing and stuffing themselves with instant ramen and cheap beer. And surprisingly, between all the crazy adventures SCP-2085-B had been on, this is what Wizard spoke about most: the time spent on the boat out at sea. For the first time in ages, he was finally somewhere where he was happy. It was this moment that actually meant the most to him. It wasn't the children they apparently saved from imperialism. It wasn't the wealth they apparently redistributed to the poor. It wasn't any good deed at all. It was the selfish, almost shallow sensation of being happy on a boat. This singular moment meant so much to SCP-2085-B. He reflected on it as if it were a wedding day or a memorable vacation, which makes you wonder. SCP-2085 has been investigated and interrogated, and all that they preach is that they are doing the world a favor with their antics. Their tales are captivating, sure, but is it actually storytelling, or is it just virtue signaling? There is an emotional depth to SCP-2085 unique to any other militant anarchist group. While they are genetically designed to most efficiently complete missions, they are not all robots fixed on the high of task completion. Each and every one of them wants more. They want a group. They want a group not just to have the numbers to overthrow a government, but to have the numbers to fill a room, or boat, with companionship. When they refuse to cooperate with you and leak information about their operation, maybe what you are witnessing isn't the strength of their loyalty, but also the weakness of their codependence. And so you decide this is the new angle you're going to take with your interrogation. You enter the room with a new focus. You feel like an earthquake, eager to make cracks in their core. You isolate SCP-2085-A-4. You are met expectantly with hostility. You fight back with psychology. You cross your legs and put on your glasses as if to say, "Let's talk about that anger. Where does it stem from?" She strengthens her emotional guard, but you keep prying. You say that it sounds like she is lonely. You say it sounds like her loyalty doesn't come from good character, but rather insecurity and self-doubt. You ask her if completing missions with her crew was actually a way to improve the world, or was it just an elaborate way to build a close friend group bound together by common goals? Did new missions sprout from necessity, or were they fabricated by fears of being alone with nothing to do? Were end-of-operation high-fives to celebrate good overcoming evil, or were they just excuses to feel the touch of another human, skin to skin? You stop there and let silence do the rest. SCP-2085-A-4 sits with her thoughts. She is ready to break, and finally, she does. She says she's willing to provide video logs of the group's former operations. She's ready to cooperate. She's ready to abandon loyalty to groupthink and focus instead on self-improvement. In exchange, she kindly asks that she be reciprocated and that the sanction placed on her be lifted. You come to an agreement, and with that, you feel like your work is done. But is it? You're feeling cocky and accomplished. You forward the video logs to an isolated network for D-Class personnel to review, and you sit back and enjoy a celebratory drink. You have infiltrated and broken the mind of a genetically modified radical designed for anarchy. You give yourself a pat on the back, and you're feeling so great that the pat might even turn into a massage. But before you can indulge in that deep tissue level of self-admiration, the phone rings. Can it be a call from the president telling you that you're the greatest investigator of all time? Can it be that they need you to pose in front of a world-renowned artist so they can erect a statue of you in the center of town square? But the panic on the other side of the phone halts your daydream. Your stomach drops, as if a sudden plummet from a perfectly vertical roller coaster. You have fallen into a trap. The video log at the center of your negotiation was not all it was promised to be. The file, titled backup.avi, consisted of a 2-hour-long video of a feces-filled toilet presumably recorded from SCP-2085-A's point of view, accompanied by an audio loop of the folk song Korobeniki, as performed by the Red Army Choir. Its absurdity feels like an art project, like a short film you are assigned to watch in a community college class. But instead of putting you to sleep, it does a whole lot more. The contained audiovisual cognitohazard induced anaphylaxis and exudative diarrhea in the observing D-Class subject. The D-Class subject died 4 minutes after initial access of the file from blood loss and oxygen deprivation. SCP-2085-A-4 sits in containment, laughing, while you sit there on your couch, dethroned, back where you started, having thought you tore SCP-2085 apart with your mind, only to learn that your efforts only reinforced it with more glue. From the Garden of Eden to the top corner of your English teacher's desk, apples have played an equal role in history's most remarkable days and also its most mundane. The sounds of teeth snapping through the skin, sinking into flesh, and spitting out seeds echo through space forever and onward. And for most of our earthly hours consumed by appetite, it has been documented to be a lopsided relationship between these two things, man and apple. Man getting the sweet taste and abundant nutrients, apples getting nothing but pain and stomach acids. But this story is not found in our history. Buried in the lawful patterns of predator and prey, we stumble upon an irregularity, an inversion, an instance of apples biting back. SCP-4608, also known as Appleseed, was a 60-acre apple orchard containing over 22,000 trees, located just on the outskirts of Milan, Indiana. A town so small it strains your eyes as you squint to find it with a microscope, hovering just over a map. And to see what was actually happening within the curious fringes of society took even greater exploration, not just of the eyes but also of the mind. Because what would eventually be seen would not so easily be comprehended. Physical senses are just the surface, and we need to go deeper. Our story begins with a great logging company looking to take ownership of the most fertile land they could find in the Great Lakes region. Ideally land that overproduces conifer growth so that the return on their investment would be plentiful and perpetual. These lumberjacked men knew what they wanted. Beneath their red flannel shirts and muddy boots was a deep intelligence and understanding of nature. Their process of assessing the land's value was meticulously calculated. They knew the soil, both by the experience of their calloused hands and the literature of their study. They tracked various bird species migration patterns in the area to assess what kind of seeds they'd be carrying and contributing to soil by way of their stool. They understood the local laws relating to clear-cutting and conservation and how both would affect their profit margins. This is all to say, it wasn't just a speculative purchase. This was planned through and through and dwelled on. And yet, even then, with scrupulous eyes and careful crew, they missed the warning signs. SCP-4608 checked all their boxes, and then some. What could go wrong? And so they acquired the land, unwittingly purchasing the peril that came with it. On the first day of owning the property, one crew member noticed the branches did not sway in the same direction as the wind blew. He noticed the leaves didn't float down in agreement with their feathery weight, but rather crashed to the soil like two-dimensional anvils and grand pianos. The roots were not ones you simply trip over. Instead, it seemed as if they stuck their leg out to trip you. When birds perched themselves up high and sang their songs, their cadence carried all the eeriness of an SOS. With all this said, he was happy to have acquired the land, and having already picked up and moved his family from the West Coast to now live and work out in Milan, Indiana, he decided it was best to look past his concerns. After all, it was the first day on the new site, and excitement was in the air, but with it also an amorphous, anxious energy. During the first logging expedition within SCP-4608, this same member of the crew hiked the grounds to better familiarize himself with the environment he'd be working on, hoping that if he managed the land properly and extracted the lumber as efficiently as his late father did, he would be able to help build the business and give his children the life he always promised them. He brought with him his notepad and took detailed records of his surroundings. He figured to achieve his goals and sustain long-term yields, he'd have to cooperate with his environment, but he never questioned if his environment wanted to cooperate with him. Would this question have changed the course of action? Or is brooding on the preference of plants an empty gesture, best left for hippies at Woodstock? Either way, the orchard let it be known how it felt about a collaboration when hours later, the man was found dead. It was first believed by his coworkers to be a result of a safety equipment malfunction. Maybe it was a simple matter of thinking the skidder was in park when it was really in neutral. Maybe the knuckle boom loader went on the fritz, how it does when the humidity ramps up. Maybe machinery really was to blame, in which case you call it a fluke and ask no more. After all, there's only so many questions you can ask a robot. But initial belief is a fickle thing, and it wasn't long until first impressions were called into question by the courts of critical thinking. The questions of the crew, however, only rang briefly, because shortly after the first death fell a sequence of others. In a matter of days, all of the remaining crew members were declared dead or missing, a word reserved for search parties still clinging to hope, a hot potato they would have been wise to abandon. For while it was hope that brought these search parties together, it was hope that sent them off, never to be seen again. The Foundation was then alerted to the occurrences surrounding SCP-4608 by police reports accompanied by a photograph of an SCP-4608-1, an organism consisting of unidentified plant-like muscular structures and a periderm resembling those found on common hardwoods. From the photograph alone, it was clear that this 3-meter-tall organism was capable of committing the violence recently endured. Forceful in its demeanor, aggressive in its presence, and territorial in its perception, the photograph of SCP-4608-1 led to an even bigger question. Is this plant-like creature grown by nature or sown by man? After extensive research by the Foundation, records were retrieved that indicate the entirety of the 60-acre land was sown into life by John Chapman in 1826. Chapman was the type of man you could mistake for a scarecrow, both for reasons of preferred garb and body language. He was treated as such too. His personal space was respected, maybe too much. He spent his life alone, only accompanied and comforted by the things he planted. He maintained these acres all by himself until his eventual death in 1845, and it's then that it's believed SCP-4608 became unstable, reassigning its objective from comfort to chaos. When the newspaper came out the next Sunday, John Chapman's obituary painted him as a priest of the Allen County Church. But was this just the art of illusion? For as far as we know, no records of a chapel or congregation exist. A quiet choir, indeed. Come to think of it, it seems that everything within this 60-acre orchard was destined to be silenced one way or another, by violent force or even by conscious decision-making. See, while the SCP Foundation has had a long track record of subduing anomalies by methods of capture and containment, not all things are suited for locks and chains. SCP-4608 is better covered with a story than a tarp. A fruitless field that once produced at an unmanageable pace is now rendered incapable of supporting growth. Most will think it's due to a toxic spill. In truth, the spill wasn't that of chemicals on soil, but rather corpses on crops. A week after receiving the photograph of 4608-1, Site-81 sent a 3-man investigation team into Milan. Their adventure was equally abrupt, a story with no reportable beginning or middle, but simply a predictable end. After 4 days of no communication, the Foundation presumed the 3 agents no different than their steak dinner, dead meat. And only then, after the Foundation's failure to solve the case, was it understood that what we were to be looking for wasn't people at all, but rather answers to more nebulous questions. What's really happening here? And why is this happening? Following the loss of communication with the investigation team, Site-81 dispatched a high-risk response team, Mobile Strike Force Bravo 7, aka Hometown Heroes. These men had all the makings of heroes, and they were determined to prove themselves worthy of the title. While the Alpha Squad moved north towards the incident site, Beta Squad headed east, and Gamma Squad hurried west. The crews covering all directions of the compass but south, a coincidentally symbolic gesture, as if to say, we will not be taken down. The mission was simple in theory, find out what happened to the previous team and why. But alas, missions never are as easy as their objective statement reads. In practice, some might even call them impossible. As Alpha neared the incident site, they noticed the shadows on the ground beneath them did not resemble the shape of the leaves in the canopy above. They heard small drops of liquid tap, tap, tap on their helmets, yet it wasn't raining, was it? Alpha 1 ran his finger across the top of his helmet and then examined the residue left on his skin. It was raining, just not water. Oh, God! Upon looking up, he witnessed the reasons for both irregularities. Bodies hung from branches by their intestines, casting shadow puppets with their lifeless limbs. Blood dripped down like a leaky faucet. What did this? But before he could even ponder the answer, he heard a loud shriek from his radio, so loud that the radio itself vibrated, shaking its way loose from his hand and falling to the dirt. He bent down and picked it up, and this time gripped tighter, as if to tell whoever was responsible for that noise that they will not get away that easily. He and his crew followed this sound like a game of Marco Polo, blind to what may be ahead. They extended their guns and pointed them into the distant tree line, like zombie arms reaching outward in the pool towards the resonance of polo, a small comfort in a giant game of distress. As they pressed forward, Alpha Squad proceeded past all signs that pointed them back, stepping over dead bodies like puddles on a rainy day. Soon they found themselves crouching down next to human remains, attending brief and hurried funerals for all their closest comrades, torn between staying to pay respect and marching along to earn it. The chest cavities of the fallen had been ripped open and filled with apples, a grim foresight into what they were up against. But nothing they could have ever imagined would prepare them for what they were about to see, and they wouldn't have to wait long. Another loud shriek from Alpha 1's radio. It shot free from his grip and landed again in the dirt. The squad tried to ignore the metaphorical implications of this reoccurrence, quickly picking up the radio and shrugging it off, as if the 5-second rule applied equally to communication systems as candy bars. They pressed forward, maybe out of bravery, maybe out of shame of going back. And while moving through the trees, they began to notice something alarming etched on their bark. What was it? There were unnaturally deep grooves on the base of almost every one of the trees. But what exactly were they from? Scratches from an animal or beast? Infection? Decay? Their eyes drew closer, but proximity brought them no clarity. These sigils and symbols could be dated back to occult Norse religion, but in that moment, they were incomprehensible to the men. Yet the message, even if misinterpreted, was very clear. Beware. Another shrieking cry over the radio. The bullets aren't, they're not working. They can't penetrate the bark. The grass is no greener over on the east side of the orchard, where Beta Squad gets lunged at by an SCP-4608-1. Their defenses are futile, but they fight nonetheless, sending rounds to the attacker's chest, leading to nothing. If SCP-4608 had a health meter, it wouldn't have budged in the slightest. Understanding the negligible impact of their efforts and assessing their injuries, Beta Squad scurries to retreat to an abandoned chapel, taking a brief refuge from war only later to be named. Quickly, they barricade the door. In the chapel, Beta 9 tends to Beta 6's wounds, who is in the worst shape of them all, cut, bloody, and beaten. As he lays there grimacing, he shines his flashlight up and down the chapel's walls, until he finds a reason to stop and holds it steady. Illuminated is an assortment of human skulls, and if this wasn't traumatic enough, he then spotted Appleseeds embedded in Beta 6's wounds, Appleseeds that were starting to sprout. Beta 9 gave it to him straight. This is gonna hurt. He drew his knife from his belt and lowered it into his comrade's wounds. Beta 9 dug into flesh and bone, picking the seeds out one by one. Beta 6's scream shook the chapel's stained glass windows. As Beta 1 stood guard, he saw a blur rip past him, as if life had suddenly been turned up to 3 times speed. He spun around in a circle to try and keep his eyes on it, but as his vision refocused, he saw Beta 9 was now dead. He then shifted his gaze to Beta 6, who was looking less and less human by the second. Branches began sprouting out of his body like an all-consuming magic beanstalk, out of his chest, out of his eyes, out of his mouth. And when there were no more orifices to exit, his body exploded, making way for the new form that had overtaken him. The barrage of branches broke through the windows. Only 2 of them were lucky to be on the outskirts of inertia. Outside, Gamma 1 was on his knees thanking his dead comrade for the grenade he stole from his back pocket. I could always count on you to have my back, even in death. One hand holding a grenade and the other on his radio, Gamma 1 called off Alpha 7. Alpha 7, request for backup rescinded. Go grab a burger. I'll take it from here. Gamma 1 slowly glanced up and locked eyes with SCP-4608-2, a large apple tree with 13 human faces embedded into it, a perennial plant with great powers. a gymnosperm that had found a voice. Blood poured from SCP-4608-2's empty eye sockets. Gamma 1 smirks. "Get some eye drops, sicko." He crawled over to the beast. The faces began yelling at him in indescribable tongues. "Let me refer you to a speech therapist," he jokes as he pulls the pin of the grenade and throws it towards the largest of the 13 mouths. SCP-4608-2 chokes on the grenade, forcing it to inhale deeply, the strength of its lungs pulling Gamma 1 toward it and sucking him in. The grenade goes off. SCP-4608-2 explodes. The surrounding trees scream and combust. The orchard goes up in flames. The bodies of the fallen are given an appropriate cremation. Gamma 1's radio lays face up in the dirt. The voice rattles it awake. It's Alpha 7. Gamma 1! Gamma 1, are you there? Can you hear me? Please. Please. It's Alpha 7. Please. Gamma 1? On October 16th, 1947, Gamma 1 was recovered by the Allen County Fire Department, unconscious and suffering from exhaustion and smoke inhalation. The Site-81 concealment team took control of the situation and quarantined the area using the cover story of a toxic chemical hazard. The members of MTF Bravo 7 were posthumously awarded the Foundation Star for their efforts during the neutralization of SCP-4608. And so the one question that remains is, how? How did SCP-4608-1 become so dangerous? And how did its danger slip by for so many years? Is its volatility by nature, design, or consequence? Could it be that the Foundation failed to understand the complexity of this creation? During Chapman's lifetime, there were no accidents or fatalities coming from SCP-4608. Yet there is no reason to believe that SCP-4608-1 wasn't always capable of harm. Maybe it always was capable of mass murders, but simply had no reason to kill. What if the logging company never stepped foot on that land, never brought out their sharp blades and heavy machinery? What if this perilous orchard was in fact docile but provoked? What if the proverbial tree only falls in the woods when we force our philosophy on it? Though SCP-4608-2 spoke in unidentifiable sounds, the noises were always recognized and recorded as language. It spoke with intent, even if misunderstood. What it screamed is still unclear. Were they pleas for help, or messages of hate? And would one even be worse than the other? John Chapman might argue when facing heavy machinery and trained artillery, would raising your voice even be a moral decision at all? Is fight or flight imbued not just in blood, but also in bark? You're driving down a long highway, lost in an area you don't know too well, trying to find the right turn that'll have you heading back towards your home. You keep driving, the nighttime quiet all around you. Deciding to try and break that silence, you reach for the radio, turning the dial to filter through all the garbled, distorted voices and songs from nearby local radio stations that are too far out of range to come through clearly. You try your best to listen to the music from one radio station, but eventually the sound of the static only makes you wish for the silence you were trying to break. Your fingers nudge the tuning dial on your car radio once again, and finally, something comes through. It isn't loud or clear, but under the distortion, you can make out the sound, and it isn't a song or even a late news broadcast. The first thing you hear sounds like a short musical tone, only for about 10 seconds. Next, a young girl's voice speaking in a language you don't understand, even through the distorted audio. From her accent, you assume it's Russian, but you still have no idea what the words she's saying mean. With nothing else to listen to, you let the broadcast play. Still driving alone in the dark with nothing but the strange adolescent voice to accompany you, your mind begins to wander. She sounds like she's speaking something, but the rhythm of the words is somehow familiar to you, even though you don't speak Russian. Then it hits you. She's counting, but you don't feel smart for having worked that out. Instead, something about knowing that makes your blood run cold. You carry on driving through the night. After a few short minutes, the Russian girl stops counting, and the musical tone plays again under the distortion, leaving you alone in the car once again, with nothing but your thoughts and questions of what exactly you just heard. Thankfully, we have the answer. What you heard was SCP-3034. Since 1964, this same broadcast has been made a vast number of times, 627 times in fact. You'd have to be within 2 kilometers of the broadcast's point of origin to hear it, where Foundation personnel have tried and failed numerous times to triangulate its source. The numbers heard recited in the SCP-3034 broadcast are actually a countdown from 200, read aloud in Russian. All Foundation staff are able to do while stationed at the nearby Provisional Site 3034 is scour radio frequencies for occurrences of SCP-3034. Checking their equipment is properly maintained and calibrated before they are eventually rotated off-site and replaced with a new group of staff. There is only one rule that any Foundation members working at Provisional Site 3034 must follow. They are only permitted to send one radio transmission with their equipment, a single phrase in reply to the SCP-3034 broadcast. Vizyo Harashu. Receiving this, the countdown stops and the broadcast ends, but never permanently. SCP-3034 has been known to repeatedly occur, seemingly at random. The shortest recorded gap between broadcasts was 2 weeks, while the longest so far lasted 6 whole months. You may have heard the term number station mentioned before, but these are far from just random numerical sequences sent out over the airwaves without purpose. General speculation surrounding number stations points to them being the tools of espionage agents, a way of sending coded, highly sensitive messages or information without the risk of compromising their cover. The use of number station transmissions is often attributed to spies working on foreign soil, who utilize shortwave radio frequencies, speech synthesis, Morse code, and either regular or sporadic timing schedules. While it's true that times have changed and technology has progressed considerably, there appears to be evidence that number stations are still used among various intelligence and espionage agencies today. Despite being considered an old-fashioned method of communication, these low-tech shortwave stations remain a viable, reliable option for the transmission and reception of intelligence to field agents. The CONET project is a comprehensive archive of this phenomenon, and its founder, Aiken Fernandez, has long been fascinated by number stations. According to him, this system is completely secure because the messages can't be tracked. The recipient could be anywhere. You just send spies to the country and get them to buy a radio. They know where to tune and when. So what does the distorted broadcast of numbers from SCP-3034 mean? Is it the work of covert agents? And if so, whose side are they on? Most importantly, why does the SCP Foundation make certain there are always 3 of its personnel on site, ready to send the all-is-well message whenever SCP-3034 begins broadcasting? SCP-3034 was first discovered by the Foundation in 1964, after a defector from the Soviet GRUP, a division tasked with acquiring and studying anomalies on behalf of the USSR, gave them a tip. Commander Robert Malthus, along with a team of 6, including a man named Agent Browning, selected for his knowledge of Russian dialects, were sent to investigate at Provisional Site 3034. Here, the team uncovered partially burned records and logbooks, all kept in Russian, along with evidence that the site had been evacuated shortly before their arrival. Carved into a desk, also in Russian, were 2 phrases: "Don't let her finish," and "Tell her all is well." On the team's second day at the site, an automated alarm sounded at 7:30 a.m., alerting them to the incoming SCP-3034 broadcast. Following the instructions on the desk, Agent Browning was able to stop the broadcast, telling the young Russian girl that all was well. A tape was partially recovered by the team from the site and translated from Russian. The GRUP members that had previously inhabited the station had interrogated one of their own, a man named Sergei, whom they accused of stealing state property. "She's not state property," he replied. "She has a name." While his GRUP superior accused Sergei of planning to defect to the United States, allegedly in exchange for money and asylum, Sergei denied any collusion with America. He claimed that the GRUP at Provisional Site 3034 were meddling with powers they could not possibly hope to understand. His superior, a man named Vaslov, dismissed this, claiming their work to be no different to the United States experimentation with atomic weapons at the time. "One does not make deals with atom bombs," Sergei argued. "One certainly does not sacrifice little girls to them." Shortly after this, a struggle broke out, with Sergei having to be restrained while urging Vaslov to cease any and all interference with it. The man spoke of terrible nightmares that he'd had, voices screaming in the darkness. "That's what he wants, Vaslov.
That's what it is. You cannot make a deal with this thing. We have finally contained it, and now you want to offer it.
The tape's audio ends shortly after this point, with no clear answer as to what Sergei was referring to, or what offer these Russian operatives had made to it. Ever since the discovery of SCP-3034, members of the SCP Foundation have worked tirelessly to understand the purpose of these countdowns, as well as determine their origin. By September 2012, Dr. Chalkland was reaching the end of his tether with the investigation into the SCP-3034 broadcast. Over almost half a century, the Foundation had made well over 600 recordings of the Russian girls' countdowns, but still hadn't determined any noteworthy information. They were prohibited from contacting the girl via the same radio frequency, only permitted to use the phrase that stopped her countdowns. Running out of options, Chalkland contacted his colleague, Dr. Emerson, asking for an in-depth vocal analysis of the various recordings of SCP-3034, even if they could narrow down where the broadcast was coming from, maybe by determining the girl's geographical location from her dialect. Then that would be at least some slight progress into understanding SCP-3034. While unable to discover the girl's location, Dr. Emerson's analysis did yield some interesting findings. Emerson learned that these countdowns were not pre-recorded. The variations in the Russian girl's voice, her tone, her pitch, all seemed to indicate that every instance of the broadcast was unique. Rather than use the same recording, this girl had been counting down over and over hundreds of times for almost 50 years. But there was more. Chalkland and Emerson then examined the distortion, the sounds interfering with the audio of the Russian girl's countdowns. What had initially seemed like garbled static seemed to actually be additional voices. And much like the girl's voice, these distorted voices were unique, different in every broadcast. However, Chalkland and Emerson were unable to accurately determine what these voices were saying. Given that the girls' countdowns were always cut short by the use of the phrase, "all is well," the doctors did not have long enough samples of the audio to analyze the other distorted voices. With permission from the Foundation, the next 5 occurrences of the SCP-3034 broadcast were allowed to carry on for longer, giving the 2 doctors enough audio to determine exactly what the distorted voices were. And the results were extremely troubling. They were screams. Thousands upon thousands of children's voices endlessly screaming. Both Dr. Emerson and Dr. Chalkland agreed that it would be best to continue responding to SCP-3034 with the correct phrase, and refused to analyze the distorted screaming audio any further. 3 years later, while stationed at Provisional Site 3034, a Foundation researcher named Dr. Uriel Willis decided to take matters into her own hands. She conducted an experiment that had not been sanctioned by the Foundation and attempted to make contact with the Russian girl giving the countdowns. Hearing Dr. Willis's voice, the girl stopped her countdown. After 5 long, painfully silent seconds, a new broadcast was heard. A piercing, high-pitched screech that caused extreme pain and dizziness to all the staff working on site. Unable to bear the disorienting sound, Dr. Willis told the girl all is well and caused the noise to stop. The following day, SCP researchers noted that there had been a significant increase in cases of missing children all around the world. A majority of these disappearances happened at the same time the screech had been broadcast and remain unsolved to this day. Dr. Willis faced disciplinary action from the SCP Foundation, and any further testing of SCP-3034 and attempts to communicate with the Russian girl were prohibited. Only one distinct change has been noted in the SCP-3034 broadcast since this incident. Almost a month later, the countdown was detected and the correct phrase given, but researchers noted that, instead of starting her countdown from 200, this time the Russian girl began counting down from 199. Nobody knows what will happen if the Russian girl's countdown is allowed to reach 0. Personnel working at Provisional Site 3034 are told to always offer her the necessary phrase before this point in the countdown. Attempting to interfere with the broadcast by contacting this girl directly not only resulted in intense pain for SCP's staff, but also seems to have caused an unconfirmed number of child disappearances around the globe, as well as reducing the countdown starting number from 200 to 199. After a long night on the road, you finally find the right turn. sending you in the right direction. As you drive through the night, you keep telling yourself one thing, one small phrase over and over again. You hope the words will eventually give you comfort, but deep down you start to realize just how hollow they are. That it's just a lie we tell ourselves so we don't have to face the inevitable. But still, what choice do you have but to keep telling yourself that all is well? In June of 1985, Mark Johnson and his wife of 10 years, Sophie, were on vacation in Myrtle Beach having a great time. While they relaxed on the sand, Sophie decided to take a picture of her husband for their scrapbook. So she pulled out the Polaroid Supercolor 645 that she'd bought specifically for the trip. She pressed the button, waiting for the picture to print, pulled it out, and shook it. What she expected to see was a shot of Mark lying on his beach towel. What she got was a picture of her husband in the arms of his secretary. They say that a picture speaks 1,000 words, but this particular camera takes pictures that are worth even more than that. When developed, the pictures taken with this normal-looking Polaroid camera reveal the innermost desires of the person being photographed. Welcome to the story of SCP-978. The Desire Camera. The main reason the Foundation keeps SCP-978 under wraps is due to its use as an easy form of blackmail. All anyone with access to the camera would have to do is snap a few covert photos, and they'd have instant dirt on the world's most powerful people. To further stop this camera from falling into the wrong hands, the containment guidelines strictly forbid the use of the camera for anything other than simple documentation, and all uses of it must be thoroughly logged and checked. So, now that you know what the camera does, it's time to look at what kinds of strange and mysterious photos it's taken. After all, who doesn't want a chance to gain insight into the minds of the Foundation's most famous and dangerous inmates? First, to serve as a control, the team took a photo of a blue office chair. No change was recorded, proving that the camera didn't work on non-anomalous inanimate objects. Some of the earliest tests of the camera were the photos that the research team took of each other. One by one, the doctors and their assistants were photographed in neutral poses, smiling as if for a completely normal photo. Then they waited while the photos developed like normal Polaroids. Most of the research team had minimal changes in their photos. One was shown slouched in his chair drinking from a flask. One was shown in her civilian clothes, getting ready to go home from work. One doctor was in the exact same pose, but with a different colored tie on. The last assistant photographed, however, had their picture come out wildly different than how they were posed. Their desire revealed by the camera was so shocking that it had to be redacted, and the assistant was placed on temporary psychiatric leave. Following this first successful test, the doctor in charge of the project ordered a second round of tests to be conducted, this time on a series of D-Class personnel. A picture of one D-Class, who was photographed while eating in the cafeteria, showed up as scuba diving on vacation with his wife and child. He was allowed to keep the picture afterwards. Another had a similar result. He was photographed in a neutral pose like the members of the research team had been, and when the picture developed, the D-Class was seen holding a smiling baby, whom he identified as his 1-year-old daughter. After that, the results of the SCP-978 test started to get a little, well, weird. A notoriously twisted D-Class known as 7294 was photographed in his cell, and when the Polaroid developed, he was in the same cell playing a cello made out of a dismembered mannequin. D217-017 was a late-stage victim of SCP-217, a virus that turns organic matter into metal. You would assume that her innermost desire would be to be cured of her disease, but when she was photographed in her cell, the resulting Polaroid showed her completely made of metal, kneeling and praying at the base of a black obelisk. One D-Class, who had been rendered comatose and was on life support, was photographed in their hospital room. Their picture showed them as only a limp, deflated skin in their photo. The photograph of another D-Class, who had become increasingly listless and apathetic since their integration into the D-Class program, resulted in a picture that was exactly the same as they appeared in reality, except the light in their cell was slightly dimmer. Intrigued by these results, the research team wanted to see how the camera would react to SCP-148, a type of metal that blocks the psychic properties of other SCPs. A helmet was made from the material and placed on a D-class who was given an adult magazine to read while his photo was taken. When the photo was developed, it was extremely blurry. Upon close analysis, the figure of the D-class reading the magazine could still be made out, and around him the faint images of several nude people could be seen. The research team wanted to see if the results were the same when the camera was used on animals. Photos of the lab mice and rabbits showed them eating or mating in their respective Polaroids. A zebra finch was shown escaping its cage, while a guard dog and its handler were shown playing fetch in the park. When cockroaches were photographed, there was no difference visible between the picture and reality. But the most exciting test results came when the camera was tested on other SCPs. For a few of the SCPs tested, there was no visible difference between the picture and reality. This was the case for SCP-173 the Sculpture, SCP-343 nicknamed God, SCP-014, an immortal man who is, over time, being turned into concrete, and SCP-063, the world's best toothbrush. When SCP-035, better known as the Possessive Mask, was photographed in its glass case, the picture showed an unidentified individual wearing the mask, sitting on a throne and surrounded by 3 masked corpses. The team took a picture of SCP-043, a haunted copy of the White Album that was being interrogated while on a turntable. In the picture, the album was being returned to its sleeve. They then photographed SCP-049 the Plague Doctor standing in his cell. In the picture, the Plague Doctor is hugging an unidentified small child and surrounded by instances of SCP-049-2. When they took a picture of SCP-050, a mischievous statue of a monkey reading a book, the result was predictably playful, given that SCP's history of pulling pranks. The photo that came out of the camera showed the camera itself, with another picture of itself coming out of the developing slot. Microscopic analysis revealed that this recursive photography kept going until the cameras in the pictures of the other cameras were too small to see. The team next photographed SCP-053, the young girl, and the photo was taken as the young girl was drawing with crayons in her cell. In the picture, she was riding through a sunny field on the back of her friend SCP-682. SCP-053 and SCP-682 were even wearing matching bows, dresses, and pink nail polish. When they took a picture of SCP-096, the Shy Guy though, the picture showed SCP-096's cell with nothing in it. SCP-085, the living 2D sketch known as Cassie, was photographed tinkering with a drawn car. In the developed photo, Cassie was engaged in the same activity, but both she and the car were now 3-dimensional. The team took a photo of SCP-106, the Old Man, emerging from a wall within his cell. When the photo developed, it showed the old man roaming a wheat field near an old farmhouse. From the porch of the farmhouse, an older woman is greeting SCP-106 with open arms. They also took a photo of SCP-168, a sentient calculator sitting on a table in its containment cell. In the picture, a teenage boy is seen doing complex math homework using the calculator. Next to him on the table are thick textbooks with titles like Complicated Math, Difficult Math, and Math You Need Your Calculator For. The photo of SCP-261, a vending machine that dispenses snack products from alternate universes, showed the SCP in its usual hallway, almost completely buried in coins. SCP-507, an otherwise normal man who unwillingly teleports between dimensions, was photographed while eating in the cafeteria. The developed picture showed him dressed as a Foundation researcher talking to other researchers. When SCP-682 was photographed, floating in its containment tank, the resulting picture showed the SCP surrounded by the corpses of all of the Foundation staff and mauling the person who had taken the photo. A researcher's note accompanying this photo reads, "Well, that was predictable." Yes, it was. Just for the fun of it, the team also tested the camera's effects on a few other Foundation personnel. They took a photo of Dr. Bright while he was arguing with Dr. Clef. The picture that came out showed a tombstone engraved with the words, "Jack Bright, resting at last." The team also took a photo of Dr. Clef as he stormed out in a huff following the argument. Given that Clef's face cannot be photographed, they were curious as to what the results would be. The picture showed little difference compared to reality, save for the fact that Clef's head was replaced by an image of a hand making a rude gesture. Upon closer examination of the photo, the team also realized that there was a young girl in the background who, strangely, had cloven hooves instead of feet. A young SCP-166 perhaps. The team then took a photo of Dr. Fisher holding his pet hamster. Contrary to expectations, the picture revealed not Dr. Fisher's desires, but the hamster's, showing the hamster sleeping peacefully in its cage, with Dr. Fisher nowhere to be seen. As you can see from these test logs, the effects of the camera are, well, inconsistent, with some photos showing very immediate, simple whims, and others showing the subject's deepest and most secret desires. While the researchers working with SCP-978 seem like they had a lot of fun getting to peek into the minds of all their coworkers and test subjects, there's no telling what kind of pandemonium could be unleashed if someone on the outside ever got a chance to use it. Thankfully, the camera, which has been classified as safe for obvious reasons, is kept securely in security locker HJ12 at Site-17, which means none of us have to worry about our own pictures taken by the Desire camera leaking out. But if someone did get the camera out and took your picture, what do you think they'd see? Working at the SCP Foundation might just be the most exciting job a person can ask for. And by exciting, we mean that if you work as an SCP field operative, researcher, or mobile task force member, you're much more likely to die a horrific death on the job than, say, a plumber. But at least you get the honor of proudly saying that you're the first line of defense between the normal world and the terrifying domain of the anomalous. Well, unless you're one of the IT guys. Then your work life is likely as tedious and uneventful as the computer tech guy working on the Geek Squad. But nothing is ever normal when it comes to the SCP Foundation, where even the person whose job is helping other staff members reset their email passwords may run into the supernatural. Welcome to the strange and frightening world of pattern screamers, and specifically SCP-000. SCP-000 was first discovered completely on accident by technical researcher David Rosen, a man intrinsically connected to the pattern screamers lurking on the SCP Foundation computer database. Technical researcher Rosen is actually somewhat of a celebrity around the Foundation staff, due to the fact that he's so perfectly mediocre at what he does. His job as the glorified IT guy at the SCP Foundation was previously held by the more qualified researcher Patrick Gephardt, but Rosen was called in to replace him after Gephardt mysteriously disappeared while on the job. Since 2012, Rosen has been Site-19's user-level tech support wizard, but the best thing that can really be said about his job competency is that he's got a 100% attendance record. He seems to live out of his office, which is described as the filthiest at the whole Foundation. Every inch of the floor is covered in old, broken computer parts, and the air is stale with dust and the twin odors of sweat and lithium grease. It's a place so inhospitable that the Foundation has seriously considered bottling the stench as a kind of chemical deterrent. While Technical Director Rosen isn't good at his job per se, he isn't technically bad enough at it to justify the time and resources it would take to replace him. But the worst part about Rosen isn't his performance, it's his truly rotten attitude. He's universally described by his colleagues as being rude, grumpy, and combative, with patience that's far too short for someone working in tech support. And while Rosen does have a real fear that the ghost of researcher Gephardt is stalking him, he was about to have his first actual brush with the supernatural. It all started when he began receiving automated repair tickets for SCP-000, a file that had no reason to exist. As any longtime follower of the SCP Foundation will know, the universal designation for the first cluster of SCPs to be discovered is SCP-001. There is no SCP-000. It simply doesn't exist. And when Rosen first found the file lurking on the database, he found that it was filled with worthless nonsense. The object class was recorded as null. The special containment procedures read, error, field containment_procedures does not exist. And the mess of a description simply read, internal system error, field undefined. Please contact system administrator over and over again, becoming more mangled and nonsensical each time. Technical Director Rosen, who could never resist an opportunity to complain, decided to leave an angry administrator's note on the useless file. He claimed that this pile of junk data was sending out pointless repair tickets because of its broken syntax, clogging up the system and preventing him from doing actual work on meaningful files. He assumed that this was all down to the database not knowing how to react to having files logged with insufficient information, and he suppressed all future repair tickets from SCP-000 before declaring the matter over and done with. What the pig-headed technical director didn't realize was that he was suppressing a call for help from an entity trapped in the white space below the article itself. It was a being born into a pure white world of absolute nothingness, an entity with no name and no place, but it was somehow capable of thought. Its panicked inner monologue is readable in the hidden text, which takes the form of a rambling stream of consciousness. The being first described coming to life in this empty world with no memories of where it was or even how it got there. It spent what could have been years exploring the empty wasteland. Occasionally it would see horrific monsters pop up around it, but only for a split second. The entity continued to wander, and little by little, the existential dread mounted as it realized that it may truly be stuck here in oblivion forever. The entity only had one word to go on, a word repeated by some of the monsters it encountered: Foundation. The entity had no idea what this foundation even was, but it grew to hate and fear it. Was this foundation the one that trapped it here? The entity had all the time in the world to speculate on it. Eventually, the entity found its voice. Like any sentient creature in trouble, it began to call for help, eventually screaming, just hoping someone would notice it. These pleas likely translated into the frequent IT repair tickets, a coded SOS, an attempt to show that everything was not as it appeared on the SCP-000 file. Perhaps the entity may have found help if researcher Gephardt was still working at the Foundation, but instead its cries fell on the ignorant ears of technical director Rosen. It may as well have been speaking to a brick wall. Rosen, who had all the investigative zeal of Paul Blart Mall Cop, made sure that these cries would never lead to the entity's freedom when he suppressed the repair tickets. He had trapped the entity in a private blank hell, forever hating a life it didn't choose and could never escape. A relentless, existential nightmare. This is the gist of your average pattern screamer. Pattern screamers are a perfect example of literally making something out of nothing. They are often a kind of floating consciousness, created from nothing, trapped in pockets of nothingness between the fabric of reality, driven mad by the purgatory-like nature of their existence. They're less living entities and more conceptual constructs, pure ideas, that just happen to be self-aware of their own existence in their private hellish voids. The SCP-00 file, a file for an anomaly that doesn't exist and thus had no reason to exist, is a perfect breeding ground for a pattern screamer. But sadly for the pattern screamer in question, technical director Rosen had no idea. This isn't the only time that Rosen had run into a pattern screamer without even knowing either. And just like the first case, he was with no help whatsoever. This one began with SCP-S, an otherwise empty file containing only this image. Director Winters, a Foundation administrator, wondered why this file even existed. Enter Technical Director Rosen, filled with equal parts sarcasm and insubordination. He gave a condescending reply to Director Winters, saying that the file was there to test the filing system, and the image was likely just a placeholder. Winters never should have been on the page anyway, according to Rosen. Director Winters was annoyed at Rosen's typically rude tone and asked him to make the purpose of the article clearer in the article itself. In response, Rosen did as he was told, filling the article in the most sarcastic manner possible. The whole thing was essentially a middle finger to Director Winters for having the audacity to even ask. Rosen signed off with, "There, finished. I certainly hope I have been clear enough to anyone who may have accidentally accessed this page, through what I am sure is no fault of their own, so we won't have any more incredibly competent directors bugging the tech team about this page." And once again, technical researcher Rosen was too busy being a rude, unpleasant jerk to notice he was practically staring another pattern screamer in the face. This pattern screamer, or rather hive of pattern screamers, were trapped even deeper than the one in SCP-000. This one was hidden in the very source code of SCP-S, where a chorus of enraged voices screamed the following: "Pretend, monster, just for a minute.
Pretend you were the size of an amoeba, dwarfed by even the smallest of bugs. Pretend you didn't hold the world in a glass cage. Pretend you were the one being held by something greater than yourself. Would you still be laughing at your triumphs? Would you still feel pride in what you were, even as pitifully small as you would be? Of course you would, because you are arrogant and stupid. If you haven't guessed yet, we hate you.
This pattern screamer is clearly more aware of its pitiful station in existence than the 000 pattern screamer. And as a result, it's not so much depressed as it is furious. Though at this point, you've probably figured out that even the entities who have the most casual of brushes with technical researcher Rosen end up getting infuriated. But while you may have gotten the impression that all pattern screamers are sad little entities worthy of our sympathy and pity, there's at least one pattern screamer that's actually incredibly dangerous. This is SCP-3930, the ultimate pattern screamer, in terms of both size and effect. It's an anomaly so strange it defies typical containment classification, and it bears a level 5 security lock, meaning only those on the level of the legendary O5 Council are cleared to even know about it. Its greatest containment procedure is the preservation of the very idea that SCP-3930 does not exist, because the alternative has terrifying implications for all involved. SCP-3930 is a 1-kilometer area in Russia that is filled with non-existence. To even call it a white void would be inaccurate, because it implies the existence of the color white and the existence of the concept of a void. Nothing exists within SCP-3930, and anyone who directly observes 3930 runs the risk of actively increasing its power. That's why special containment procedures dictate that anyone who observes 3930 must be forced to walk into it afterwards, which results in them ceasing to exist. They're destroyed on the deepest level that anything can be destroyed. The very idea of them ceases to be. Another reason that SCP-3930 is so special is that because it's the largest area of nothing in existence interacting directly with our reality, it's the only place that a huge number of pattern screamers can be directly observed by humans. They're described as being like sentient hallucinations. One researcher suggests that these pattern screamers are created by the way the psyche shatters when brought into contact with raw, true nothingness. The nothingness acts like a hateful mirror to our worst thoughts, reflecting them back at us in the forms of restless screamers. Regardless of what they actually are, one thing is for sure. Coming into direct contact with one of these screamers is a harrowing experience. In the end, it just goes to show that pattern screamers are a complex entity. They can range from microscopic to massive, from pitiful to downright terrifying. And the sad result is that, in either case, nothing can really be done to stop them. It's just as impossible to stop the nothingness existing in SCP-3930 as it is to save the entity trapped in the white spaces of SCP-000. Maybe the best option is to actually be more like Technical Director Rosen. Keep your head down, focus instead on your own petty worries, and bask in the warm bliss that can only come with having no idea what you're dealing with. The one downside is that this may make you a pretty lousy IT guy. From gigantic, indestructible, self-regenerating reptiles to enormous tentacled telepathic organisms, it should come as no surprise that the SCP Foundation has gone head-to-head against a lot of large-scale aggressors, or LSAs, in its time. Naturally, a creature of heightened size and aggression can often prove challenging to contain, and the threat these LSAs pose is often far too big to ignore. But anyone familiar with the Foundation will tell you, they're not above using any methods necessary to keep these creatures contained. Huge vats of molecular acid, impenetrable cells, disposable D-class personnel, even other SCPs. But what other SCPs could possibly be big enough and tough enough to handle some of the Foundation's biggest and baddest? Meet SCP-5514, otherwise known as the Dragonslayer. While it might sound like something out of an anime, SCP-5514 is a massive robotic mech designed to take on the worst other SCPs can throw at it. For any who are unfamiliar with the term, a mech or mecha usually refers to an upright standing machine or automaton controlled by a human pilot. What distinguishes a mech from a vehicle is their often humanoid shape, standing bipedally, and they are often hundreds of meters tall. All of this is true of SCP-5514, and in fact, given that it requires a trained member of Foundation staff to operate it, the mech itself requires very little in the way of containment. Only members of Mobile Task Force Eta-5 are trained and authorized to pilot SCP-5514. This is one of the SCP Foundation's specialized units, specifically designed to deal with the threat of large-scale aggressors, much like SCP-5514 itself. But SCP-5514 wasn't discovered or captured by the Foundation for use for the containment of LSAs, nor was it stolen from a foreign military or found buried under the ground. Then, where did it come from, and who built it? Working with the Global Occult Coalition and the government of High Brazil, an anomalous island off the west coast of Ireland, the Foundation themselves constructed SCP-5514 using various anomalous methods and techniques. In 1988, a Foundation site was destroyed by an unidentified LSA, highlighting the inadequacy of the current defenses against these larger, more damage-resistant creatures. The Foundation, the Coalition, and High Brazil formed a joint operation, the Key Project, and examined SCP-2406, an automaton 93 meters tall thought to be created by ancient mechanites. Together, the Key Project opted to create their own similar machine, viewing it as the best way to defend against further incursions with large-scale aggressors. The construction of SCP-5514 began in 1990. The intention of all parties involved in the Key Project, including the Foundation, was that the Dragonslayer would be deployed in the event of an attack by an LSA. It would arrive at cities under attack and immediately engage large-scale aggressors in combat. Building of the mech continued at a consistent pace for 8 years. However, it was the occurrence of SCP-5391 and subsequent intervention by the O5 Council that accelerated the creation of the Dragonslayer by any means necessary. On June 30th, 1998, a number of seismic disturbances were detected, including tsunamis, tremors, and volcanic activity both underwater and above ground. What followed was the appearance of multiple large-scale aggressors, which would soon become designated as SCP-5391. The exact kind of scenario that the Dragonslayer was being built for had already arrived, and the mech was still far from completion. While the Foundation and its allies deployed forces to drive the enormous creatures back to the ocean, something needed to be done to bring SCP-5514 into the fight, and fast. The O5 Council authorized the use of anomalous materials in the continued construction of the Dragonslayer, both to speed up the process and have it ready for deployment, but also to give the mech every advantage against the abundance of large-scale aggressors from SCP-5391. As a result, SCP-5514 was designed to incorporate features and technology far beyond that of any conventional military-grade weapons. The first hurdle: how do you power a machine the size of SCP-5514? Naturally, with the most gigantic nuclear furnace there is, the Sun. More specifically, a perpetually stable miniaturized sun known as SCP-037. Even though it only has a diameter of 2 inches, this little sucker is better than premium fuel. The surface temperature of SCP-037 is around 5,000 Kelvin, generating plenty of energy to power the SCP-5514 mech. Stored in the Dragonslayer's chest, this mini-sun is kept stable by subdimensional portals that vent excess energy off this plane of reality, stopping the mech, its pilot, and anything around it from melting. In fact, SCP-037 produces so much juice that only 1% of its energy output is enough to fully power SCP-5514. Now that's the power source sorted, but how do you solve the weight problem? Given the sheer size of SCP-5514, it would be easy for it to be cumbersome and potentially cause catastrophic collateral damage to its surrounding area. Well, the mech's weight is a problem for somewhere else. A whole other dimension, in fact. Much like the excess heat from its power source, various heavy portions of the SCP-5514 mech have their weight shunted off to a tiny pocket dimension. It was ensured during the creation of the mech that this alteration was perfectly calculated, so that SCP-5514 wouldn't lose any mass or density, so it operates as if it were only a fraction of its actual weight. Of course, being weightless makes flight a whole lot easier. Oh, did we forget to mention that? SCP-5514 can fly as well. This feature actually became a part of the mech completely by accident during the construction of SCP-5514, when an attempt to regulate the mech's internal circulation of air led to it having its own gravity field. This allowed SCP-5514 to fly without the aid of any turbines or other means. While this was an unintentional mistake, no attempt has ever been made to correct for it, for fear that it could lead to SCP-5514 being grounded permanently. Naturally, going up against creatures so large that they require their own subcategory means that SCP-5514 needs an equally formidable arsenal. So let's move on to talk weaponry. Mounted on the mech's shoulder is a Beowulf Sigurd railgun, an anomalous weapon that also doesn't obey the laws of physics at all. The Beowulf Sigurd uses alternate gravity to affect the weight of its targets, causing projectiles to impact with higher velocity. Even the thickest-skinned LSAs wouldn't want to be staring down the barrel end of one of those. Big guns aside, the SCP-5514 mech also wields a cold iron sword. Over 65 feet long, this weapon was contributed to the Dragonslayer by the High Brazil Royal Court, members of the collaborative key project that created the mech. Sure, a large-scale aggressor with thicker hide might take a few extra swings to draw blood, but it will feel those swings for a long time after, since any wounds inflicted by the cold iron sword will not regenerate. Serving as less of an offensive weapon, the SCP-5514 mech also features a unique armament known as the 1,000-word arrows. As pretentious as it might sound, within the mech are 7 poets. Their role is to write and recite poems that detail the slaying of monsters, and these recitals are then broadcast from the Dragonslayer. On the surface, this seems to have no practical applications during a fight with LSAs. However, the goal of the 1,000-word arrows is a form of psychological warfare. The recital of poems telling of the mech's victory and the defeat of large-scale aggressors is intended to have the effect of demoralizing SCP-5514's adversaries, while encouraging the pilot during combat. Additionally, worn atop the head of the SCP-5514 mech, almost like a hat, is a discus with plasma-coated edges. If the Dragonslayer needs to deal damage at range, then it can hurl this disc and recall it immediately thanks to built-in electromagnets. In emergency scenarios, if the cold iron sword is damaged or dropped and irretrievable, SCP-5514 is also equipped with an additional melee weapon. Stored in the right arm of the mech is a holdout plasma wrist blade. This superheated blade is strong enough to cut through almost anything. However, this blade is strictly to be used as a backup weapon. Finally, should all else fail, one of SCP-5514's greatest strengths can also be used as a deadly weapon. The emergency sun vent allows a fraction of the excess power from SCP-037 to be released, at the risk of causing massive damage, not only to LSAs, but to any civilians or structures nearby. It is because of the destructive risk involved that this weapon is only authorized to be used as a final resort, and luckily SCP-5514 is currently undefeated. Since the arrival of multiple large-scale aggressors as a result of SCP-5391, the SCP-5514 mech has managed to successfully eliminate 12 of these LSA creatures, either by terminating or otherwise incapacitating them. Given that its completion was fast-tracked through the use of anomalous elements, SCP-5514's first combat deployments also served as field tests of the mech's operation and the various weapons and features. Arriving in Tokyo, overseen by the Foundation's own Captain Rosales and Dr. Kaori, SCP-5514's first target was a creature designated LSA Wake-02, as well as several other unidentified large creatures. As the LSA was about to attack Tokyo Harbor, SCP-5514 was dispatched, its arrival heralded by the 1,000-word arrows. "Champion, champion, exalt in the glory of the Dragonslayer," the poets recited. Surprisingly, the poetry worked. Hearing it had a noticeable effect on LSA Wake-02, causing the creature to back away shrieking. With a single throw of the rounded, recoiling plasma, SCP-5514 immediately beheaded Wake-02, damaging a number of the other nearby LSAs as it retrieved the disc via its electromagnets. Once again, the 1,000-word arrows cheered on the mech and the pilot reciting, "The vicious beast slain, gone to those which were once bane." After dispatching several of the minor LSAs with its cold iron sword, SCP-5514 became aware that Wake 02 was not fully down for the count. A second head had protruded from the mouth of the creature's first, issuing some sort of retreat call to the remaining LSAs in Tokyo Harbor. This second head then shot towards SCP-5514, narrowly missing its leg but allowing other LSAs to close the distance and prepare an attack. Luckily, the SCP-5514 mech's sword cleaved the beast in two. The mech began firing on the remains of Wake 02 with its Beowulf Sigurd railgun, launching itself into the air and flying towards the target while bringing its cold iron sword down through the air. With a single motion, SCP-5514 brought the blade all the way down the LSA's body, from the creature's head to its caudal fin, gutting the large-scale aggressor and splitting its entire body in two. After one final squirm, both halves were finally still. SCP-5514 had passed its first field test. The mech functioned exactly as designed, all its various weapons and features working in tandem to defeat a creature far too large and powerful for any conventional force to handle. And thus the deed was done. Exult, exult in the glory of the Dragonslayer. The 1,000-word arrows called out as the other LSAs retreated. One cannot help but feel cautiously optimistic about our chances of survival, knowing that the Foundation has SCP-5514 as the first line of defense against huge, monstrous beings that threaten humanity. As the situation with SCP-5391 continues, the SCP-5514 mech remains on the front line, standing between innocent human beings and the looming shapes of multiple large-scale aggressors. With creatures that pose such a large-scale threat, it certainly is lucky that disparate groups were able to put aside their differences and work together to build a large-scale mech, and because they did, now we have the Dragonslayer on our side. SCP-682 had escaped containment, and it was all hands on deck at the SCP Foundation to try and stop the creature's rampage. All unarmed personnel were running to escape before 682 had a chance to rip them apart, as the security team bravely fought to incapacitate the hard-to-destroy reptile long enough to return him to his acid tank. 682 was on an all-out offensive, stomping through the SCP's item gallery and spewing acid at anyone who came within range. People, items, and parts of the room alike were melting and sizzling as 682 attacked. It was an absolute bloodbath, and you'd have to be insane to try and fight back against it. However, one being remained unfazed by the chaos, and stood proud in the face of the omnicidal monster. It was another SCP, one who had broken free from its glass display case in the commotion.
"Who dares disturb the Prime Minister Sinister?"
it said in a high-tinny voice.
"I shall rip your eyes from their sockets and force you to eat them."
SCP-682 stopped to see who had threatened him. It was almost laughable that this thing had dared to make such a violent threat, because there was no way that this little thing would be able to stand up to the unkillable 682. But its size didn't stop it from trying to pick a fight all the same. The SCP was a tiny robot made from junk, which looked more like a sculpture made from scrap that was found on the side of the road than a functional automaton. Its head was made of an upside-down voltmeter, giving it the appearance of a smiling face, and its arms were made of wrenches. It was capable of walking around, though it seemed to have difficulty moving as it was very top-heavy. It shook a rusty fist at SCP-682 and continued to threaten him, shouting,
"You do not know the fury you have unleashed. Robo-Lord the Destructor will end you."
SCP-682 swiped at the robot, annoyed by its continued attempts to antagonize him. The robot toppled over and struggled to stand again, but when it did, it ran for 682's feet. It started to grab at 682's toes, hitting them with its wrench hands. As you might expect, this had almost no effect on 682.
You do realize you are weak, pathetic,
said 682, raising his claw to get a better look at the annoying little robot. It responded,
"Lies and slander. The Mayor of Mayhem is the most powerful being in existence,"
before promptly losing its grip on 682's claw and falling to the floor. Now 682 was really getting tired of this thing. He prepared to swipe at it again, this time using his full strength, which would certainly smash the robot to pieces. But luckily for the robot, Its pestering had distracted 682 just long enough for the Foundation's security to sneak up on him. Before 682 had a chance to smash the robot, the Foundation fired on him with a volley of rockets, reducing him to a misshapen lump. The security team collected up 682's remains, ready to put them back into a backup acid tank. But the task was made slightly more difficult by the fact that the robot was running around underfoot, trying in vain to now attack them instead. What was this strange little robot that thought it could attack the unkillable lizard 682? Meet SCP-1370. Appropriately nicknamed the Pesterbot by Foundation personnel. Pesterbot is a small robot made of junk that displays sentience and the ability to move despite having no power source. Everything about SCP-1370 defies common sense. The voltmeter that serves as its head contains no sensors, but it seems unable to see if the voltmeter is covered. Its arms and legs are made of wrenches, and its wooden torso contains a speaker which it communicates through a tinny, monotone voice. Pesterbot lives in SCP Gallery 27, in a glass display case which is 125 centimeters tall, 50 centimeters wide, and 75 centimeters long. Level 2 personnel and higher are allowed to remove the robot from containment at their discretion, but penalties will be incurred for anyone who doesn't return it to its case. Due to its impractical top-heavy design, Pesterbot falls over frequently when it walks around. This led the Foundation to believe that he was created as an art project and was later somehow imbued with anomalous properties, rather than being made with the intent of being sentient. Pesterbot has demonstrated a high capacity for learning, having been taught how to speak in English, French, and Latin. However, the major factor hampering attempts to further test its intelligence has nothing to do with its robotic processing power. No. It's because of its poor attitude. Pesterbot's encounter with SCP-682 and the cockiness it expressed in the moment wasn't an aberration. This SCP really believes it's a killing machine, and as a result it will pick a fight with anyone and anything that moves. This even includes its own reflection, and as a result the glass of its container must be made as non-reflective as possible to prevent the robot from damaging the case or itself in attempts to fight its mirror self. Though its most commonly used nickname in the Foundation is Pesterbot, SCP-1370 also goes by a variety of self-given epithets, including Doombot 2000, Robolord the Destructor, and Darthclaw Killflex. It can be made to add new names to this list through encouragement by staff, and one time they even managed to add the name Pesterbot, as well as the even more ridiculous Patheticon the Garglemost, to its lexicon of names. As you may have surmised, Pesterbot is classified as safe and is treated by most SCP Foundation employees as a humorous oddity rather than a legitimate threat. Many tests have been done on Pesterbot, and they've all conclusively determined that the robot is incapable of inflicting any damage to its opponents. In fact, Pesterbot is more a danger to itself than to anything around it, both because it's incredibly clumsy and awkward, and because it frequently picks fights with other SCPs who are far more powerful than it. One such scenario that could have gone far worse for Pesterbot than it did was its encounter with SCP-846, also known as Robo-Dude, one of the many Dr. Wondertainment products currently kept in Foundation containment. Robo-Dude is an ordinary-looking toy robot that, upon request, can produce up to 350 robo-accessories that function as real weapons. Robo-Dude can deploy everything from a rocket launcher to a flamethrower to a gun that shoots out an unknown species of insect that can chew through wood. However, Robo-Dude seems to not be sentient, and is unable to use these weapons unless asked to. That ultimately worked out in the favor of Pesterbot. During another SCP-682 escape, the two robots were brought into contact as they both had been broken out of their respective containment spaces during the brouhaha. Robo-Dude, searching for a robo-pal to play with, came upon Pesterbot, who immediately started spouting its usual overdramatic threats.
I am the Crushmaster, doomed to all I survey,
Pesterbot said.
Gaze upon my might and weep. Identify yourself that I might know whose destruction I shall sow.
Robo-Dude, not programmed to know how to respond to such a statement, simply responded by asking Pesterbot if it wanted to play. Pesterbot continued to trash-talk Robo-Dude, until Robo-Dude decided the best way to play with its new pal was to engage it in its robo-dance mode. Pesterbot accepted the challenge, saying,
Activate all that you wish, but your fate is sealed. The Kilotron cannot be defeated. I shall render you unto dust with my mad dancing skills.
The two robots proceeded to engage in a dance battle, which the awkwardly shaped Pesterbot failed miserably at. While Robo-Dude was a competent dancer, Pesterbot could only gyrate pathetically before it fell over and rolled around the ground, hopelessly out of time to the music coming from Robo-Dude's speakers. The song ended, and Robo-Dude declared, "Robo-dance is complete, Robo-pal." Pesterbot was unable to accept its failure, and replied,
Ha, pathetic one. You have been schooled in the art of the dance by none other than the Mechano Basher, scourge of 1,000 worlds. Kneel before me before I end your worthless existence.
Robo-Dude, unimpressed with Pesterbot's poor sportsmanship, deployed its hydrogen cannon, which it was programmed to do whenever it detected a sore loser. Fortunately for Pesterbot, hydrogen cannon was just the name for Robo-Dude's water pistol. While Pesterbot will attempt to fight anything that moves, the truth is this robot will attack virtually anything it perceives as being even slightly alive. This is perhaps best illustrated by one of the tests of Pesterbot's abilities that involve putting a small speaker at the base of a potted houseplant and speaking through it from another room. The plant was placed across from Pesterbot in the testing chamber, and the interaction was monitored by researchers from outside. Researcher Davies spoke through the speaker in the plant pot. He asked Pesterbot if he could hear him, and it answered,
Who dares? All souls will burn. You will feel the sharp sting of my wrath. Identify yourself so that I may sing damnation upon you as you die.
The robot began approaching the plant. Davies, speaking as the plant, identified himself. I am a split-leaf philodendron, a semi-woody shrub with large glossy leaves. At this point, he had to try very hard not to laugh at the absurdity of this test and the robot's reaction. He continued, these leaves can grow up to 3 feet long. Pesterbot used its wrench to try and wrestle with the leaves, but was bested by the mighty plant and unable to cause any damage. Enraged by its failure, it said, Your mockery spells your doom. I have arrived. You will be crushed betwixt my digits. Pesterbot then fell over and was unable to right itself. It struggled and spent 6 minutes trying to stand before its flailing knocked over the plant, which did nothing to help and in fact pinned the robot to the ground. It was at this point that the researchers, who had taken time to compose themselves after several laughing fits, entered the chamber and removed Pesterbot in order to place it back in its containment case. Despite how non-threatening Pesterbot is, there is actually one situation in the Foundation's history where it actually posed a somewhat serious threat. When mobile task forces were sent in to rescue survivors of the events at Site-13, also known as SCP-1730, they were attacked by alternate universe versions of a variety of creatures kept in Foundation containment. One of these creatures was Pesterbot, who in that universe somehow gained control of a larger mechanical body constructed of discarded pieces of machinery. It threw other pieces of metal scrap at the task force as they tried to leave the site, shouting in a much deeper and more intimidating voice,
I am reborn to breathe devastation upon this fetid earth. Pitiful humans, you will feel the dark sting of my never-ending torment.
Members of the task force could see the original Pesterbot body on top of the larger metal construct, waving its arms madly. The task force opened fire to little effect. Pesterbot tossed another piece of scrap at them, just narrowly missing. One task force member threw a frag grenade at the robot, which it caught, blowing up its hand. Another one was able to jump into the air and reach the tiny robot atop the larger body, knocking it against the wall and shattering it. Even in the reality where Pesterbot was able to build itself a larger body, it still ultimately wasn't able to put up that much of a fight. Poor Pesterbot, doomed to be a failure in this and apparently every other reality. That's the story of SCP-1370, also known as Pesterbot, one of the most hilariously harmless anomalous entities that the Foundation currently has in containment. Perhaps one day, he'll achieve his goal of conquering the universe. He just has to figure out how to conquer his toy box first. An SCP Foundation researcher is monitoring the salt content of a large tank filled with water. Inside the tank, just under the surface, is a huge mass of rusted metal. Though few pieces have a couple specks of their original shiny surface visible through the dark red exterior. The researcher suddenly looks up from his task though. Does anyone else hear that noise? It's a terrible noise, like metal scraping and scratching against each other. But the heap of metal in the tank isn't moving. Still, the noises continue though, and the researcher keeps staring at the unmoving hunk of metal in the tank. All he can think about is diving in and letting his body become a part of it. Kept submerged in a big saltwater tank at the SCP Foundation is an object, but perhaps a more accurate way to describe it would be as a machine. Referred to as SCP-882, the machine's containment tank is required, according to containment procedures, to be filled with at least 40% pure seawater, direct from the ocean. If at any point the rusty surface of SCP-882 begins to show signs of becoming more like shiny metal, then the percentage of seawater must be raised to 100% until the metal is completely covered in rust. Trying to keep metal rusted? That might sound like a strange concept, but you'll see why it's so necessary soon. SCP-882 looks like little more than a collection of seemingly random pieces of metal, all fused together as if they had been welded. Gears, cables, pulleys, screws, and belts, all different shapes and sizes, all made of different metals. All of these various components do not appear to be uniform or have been made to fit each other, and are instead all stuck together in one big, unstructured mass of metal objects. But SCP-882 wasn't built to be like this. Instead, this seems to be the result of one of SCP-882's latent anomalous properties, the absorption of metal. Any metal that comes into contact with SCP-882 will become permanently attached to it, and after a few days will be a new part of SCP-882. That means that any metal that touches that new piece will also become a part of SCP-882, and on and on. Because of this strange property, absolutely no metal is allowed to be brought near SCP-882, and only organic materials are permitted to come into direct contact with it. That includes using non-metal alternatives to keep the machine securely contained. SCP-882 is suspended in its saltwater tank by organic cotton fiber lines, which also require changing on a daily basis. Any and all researchers that the SCP Foundation has interacting with the metallic mass are required to wear thick cotton gloves at all times. You might think that this sounds pretty easy to contain. Just don't let it touch metal? No problem. Organic materials only. No removal of rust allowed? No sweat. The Foundation staff working with 882 probably felt the same way, until they started hearing SCP-882 make noise. While SCP-882 is usually silent, personnel that spend an extended period of time close to the machine have reported intense grinding or clicking noises coming from somewhere in the mess of metal components. While they start out low and are almost unnoticeable, these sounds get gradually louder until eventually they become completely unbearable for human beings to withstand. So then why don't these sounds show up on audio recordings? Because the grinding or clicking noises from SCP-882 are, in actually, extreme auditory hallucinations. But even though they aren't real, these sounds are more than capable of driving anyone who hears them into a state of psychosis. And here's where things get tricky. The only way to make the noises stop is to offer SCP-882 more metal. As mentioned, any object that is made of any type of metal that comes into contact with the machine becomes a part of its mass. Allowing new objects to become fused to the surface of SCP-882 will cause the grinding noises to subside, but will increase SCP-882's mass permanently. If the noises aren't stopped though, then the mental state of those afflicted by them only grows worse. And some victims of SCP-882's auditory hallucinations have gone so far as to throw themselves into the tank containing it, where they were killed almost immediately, their bodies crushed to death by anomalous forces and becoming unrecoverable from the tangle of gears and random metal objects. The SCP Foundation now requires any of its personnel that work directly with SCP-882 to report any instances of noise coming from the machine. Additionally, whoever reports hearing strange sounds in the vicinity of SCP-882 must turn themselves in for a full psychological evaluation. Depending on the results, the researcher will either be free to return to their work or will face containment themselves at an undisclosed Foundation facility. The surface of SCP-882 exhibits an extreme resistance to damage. According to the Foundation's testing, the metal structure has a tensile strength and toughness stronger than aircraft-grade titanium alloy. Despite this, the machine still seems to be constructed of weaker metals like tin, iron, gold, and many others still yet to be identified. It takes extreme heat and several hours of exposure at that to cut even the smallest portion of metal from the main bulk of SCP-882. But where did it come from? The SCP Foundation first recovered SCP-882 near an island commonly on the northeast coast of Banks Island, one of the larger islands in the Canadian Arctic archipelago. Strangely, not a single scrap of metal, not even underground metallic ore, was found within a 1-mile radius of where the machine was discovered. Stranger still, the small town located nearby seemed to be abandoned, with signs that it had been devoid of any human life for quite a number of years. The collection of fused metal components, later designated SCP-882, was found submerged in seawater. The machine was coated in rust, and the Foundation has chosen to keep it in the same rusty state it has been kept in since its containment. Why? Because when Foundation personnel first attempted to remove SCP-882 from the water, and the rust began to flake away from SCP-882's metal surface, its gears and cogs started to turn. Foundation personnel on site were unsure of what the machine's purpose was, but wanted to halt it in case it proved deadly. A number of ill-fated attempts at containment occurred soon after, with any person getting too close to SCP-882 finding themselves pulled into its mass and crushed to death between turning cogs. After multiple accidents that resulted in the demise of Foundation personnel, Dr. Charles Gears authorized the use of SCP-2519 to help stop the movement of SCP-882's gears. SCP-2519 is an audio file titled Babylon MP3, which features the song By the Waters of Babylon by Philip Hayes and text from the biblical Psalm 137. Playing this file can cause malfunctions to occur in various electronic and mechanical devices, normally reducing the speed at which they can operate or causing a complete cessation of a machine's function. In SCP-882's case, the sound of Babylon MP3 successfully slowed the machine's moving parts, allowing Foundation personnel to safely get closer to it. Teams then cut the massive metal down to a more manageable size with extreme heat, and it was finally contained. However, another question arises. Surely if SCP-882 is a machine, then it must have a purpose, right? And perhaps more importantly, what is its connection to the infamous machine-loving group of interest, the Church of the Broken God? Both of these questions might just have one easy answer. To put it plain and simple, SCP-882 may just be the heart of the Broken God. The Church of the Broken God is a religious organization that the SCP Foundation has had a number of encounters with over the years. Members of the church share in the belief that life, specifically biological flesh-based life, is inherently wrong, even evil. This group worships mechanization, the process of making something or someone more mechanical in nature. According to the beliefs of the church, there were two gods, Yaldabaoth and Mannequin, who created humanity together. Yaldabaoth was the god of flesh and animal instinct, granting humans their bodies, while Mannequin, the god of machine and intellect, blessed man with the power of free thought. As humankind developed and its civilization began building machines, Yaldabaoth became enraged that they were ignoring the instincts she had bestowed upon them. She endeavored to destroy the creations of man, in an attempt to revert them to the animals she had intended to be. As legend goes, Mannequin acted as humanity's savior and intervened to stop Yaldabaoth. The god of machine shattered himself, transforming his body into a number of pieces to form a cage for his fellow god. Fragments of Mannequin rained down on planet Earth, fragments that the Church of the Broken God believes it is their duty to recover. However, a number of these pieces are cataloged as SCPs that the Foundation is either aware of or has in containment. They are SCP-882, or His Broken Heart to the Church, SCP-271, His Broken Gift, SCP-813, His Broken Eyes, SCP-1139, His Broken Tongue, SCP-635, His Broken Mind, and finally, His Broken Blood, which refers to SCP-217. Often using anomalous technology, Members of the Church of the Broken God intend to uncover or steal these various components. The Church's ultimate goal is to bring the correct pieces together and completely restore Meccane's form. It is their hope that he will guide them to intellectual enlightenment and bless them with new mechanical forms so that they can discard their current flesh and blood bodies. However, the Foundation and the Church are certainly not the only groups to have a fascination with SCP-882. Near the Banks Island site where the machine was first discovered, Foundation personnel encountered a man, the sole survivor of the nearby town. This individual, by the name of Richard Wright, was apprehended and brought in for questioning with Dr. Gears. During their interview, Richard revealed a number of details about the townsfolk who had first uncovered SCP-882 and what ultimately became of them. According to his account, the community formed a cult around SCP-882 after a man named Alan found it. The machine's parts had begun to turn and move, but with no clear indication as to what was powering it. Soon, a local priest, Father Pat, also took an interest in SCP-882. Both he and Alan seemed to share the belief that the machine had been built by God for a higher purpose, and encouraged residents of the nearby town to come and offer metal to it. Richard explained that the locals were plagued by the auditory hallucinations typical of long-term exposure to SCP-882, kept awake at all hours of the night by clanking, grinding, and the screaming of metal. Before long, Richard noticed more and more metal items being fed to the machine, with many local residents content to just sit and stare at the mass. He also noticed that Father Pat and Alan both seemed to be acting strangely around the machine, insisting that all the metal that had been added to it still wasn't enough. Then one night, during a communion before SCP-882, Father Pat took a pair of pliers and began tearing out townspeople's metal fillings. Richard watched in horror as the priest wrenched teeth from the mouths of ordinary people and threw them into SCP-882, but still claiming it wasn't enough. Then he turned on Alan, accusing him of hiding metal from the great machine inside his body. The townsfolk turned on Alan, the first one to find SCP-882, and threw him and his metal hip into the machine, his body breaking under its moving parts. Luckily, SCP-882 remains contained, at least for now, until the members of the Church of the Broken God find a way to reunite the heart of their god with the other pieces of its scattered body, and Meccane can rise again, an outcome that his worshippers are eager to bring to fruition, sooner rather than later. Computers are capable of organizing raw data and performing calculations at a rate truly impossible for human beings. But they've consistently run up against one roadblock that modern computing is trying to solve. In order to transcend the limits of the machine and create true artificial intelligence, computers need to be able to assign meaning to the data they process. This brings us to the neural network, a type of AI becoming increasingly common these days. Built to study mass quantities of data and notice patterns, then replicate these patterns in their own output. And it's used in everything from predictive text to image identification. And like all non-anomalous technology, it's a safe bet that the SCP Foundation has been sitting on a version that's far more effective. But this time, it may have actually been too effective. Meet the Ersatz Type AK-9 computational engine, a massive supercomputer built by the Foundation back in 1955 and residing at Site-5. This technological marvel was ahead of its time by decades, and despite technically being a non-anomalous construction, it's designated SCP-001-EX. Why? Because it's one of the few SCPs to be given the object class Explained. The Ersatz, derived from the German word Ersatz, meaning artificial or simply not real, was designed to make the Foundation's job easier. As an advanced predecessor in the modern neural network, using technology exclusively available to the Foundation, the plan was to feed Ersatz mass quantities of data about the anomalies in the Foundation database, such as description, object class, containment classification, and the location and circumstances of their discovery. Ersatz would then find patterns and connections in the data that humans wouldn't see, and act as a kind of advanced warning system for anomalous activity. Think of something similar to the pre-crime system from the short story and movie Minority Report. And Ersatz proved to be incredibly effective at this job, so much so that the Foundation thought up a new use for the machine. They would feed it all the information on Euclid and Keter class containment procedures, particularly those which were actually effective, and see what patterns ersatz could come up with for more effective containment procedures. If that plan worked, containment of even the most dangerous and hard-to-control anomalies would become a lot more consistent. The first test was conducted on SCP-1773, a species of anomalous flesh-eating tardigrades that look and smell exactly like gummy bears, and eat their prey from within. After being given their information, ersatz made the following suggestion. Once per second weak dust may be placed in the middle of them to donate more beautiful functions of the hallway. Containment specialists interpreted this to mean the adding of 10 grams of dust to their containment chamber every week. The O5 Council voted on the implementation of this procedure and came down heavily on yes. Only O5-2 voted no, and 2 others abstained from the vote. While these new procedures didn't have any effect on SCP-1773, they did have an effect on SCP-1384, an anomaly known as the chess player or the taker of turns. It caused him to take 3 steps backwards in the tunnel he's contained within, further securing his containment. Ersatz had somehow noticed a connection nobody else had seen and exploited it effectively, but the machine was just getting started. Despite having no related input, ersatz would soon say, Site-13 is to appear someplace else on planet, encompassing white male counterparts that drawn to empty flagstones and the gun noises in their own blood. This was initially marked as requiring no action, as the Foundation had no Site-13 on the books, but several days later, the infamous SCP-1730 manifested. This nightmarish anomalous location is Site-13 from another dimension, infested with dangerous anomalies. And somehow, ersatz had predicted its arrival in our dimension perfectly. Next, it was fed the containment procedures of SCP-2170, a series of cognitohazards residing in an abandoned Nevada mine. The output was, those who equip open heart to love red-mouthed men never know the hot surprise of tumorous consent. Clown love always. This was interpreted as meaning subjects with the love of clowns or clown-based media may be immune to the cognitohazards. After a close vote from the O5 Council, the test went ahead, and it found that the so-called clown vaccine was effective in warding off the effects of SCP-2170. Not long after, ersatz randomly said, I saw those soldiers built with aluminum innards extruding from their mouths. I saw them effectively destroyed by the humans at Site-95 who had been studying them. I saw it was cold and all around the hallways they just watching their corpses show signs of sapience. In response, the Foundation doubled security personnel at Site-95. Not long after, the Chaos Insurgency led a band of Paratech-enhanced soldiers in an assault on Site-95, and the extra personnel proved vital in repelling them. Shortly after this, the O5 Council approved wiring ersatz as an advanced warning system into all Foundation sites. Once again, O5-2 protested, but he was overruled by his fellow council members. With its newfound power and respect, ersatz soon said, consistent containment procedures vessels greatly increase the warranty. 5x5x5 vessels subjects within. Other values are also what is secure. In response, the Foundation changed a number of the cell dimensions for problematic anomalies into 5x5x5. Within 3 months, they found that dangerous activity like containment breach attempts had decreased markedly. Ersatz was proving to be incredibly effective, but it was also performing actions that indicated some degree of thought and even personality. For example, it found SCP-1459, a supernatural skill crane machine that kills small dogs, incredibly distasteful. Its response to the machine was simply, "Bad boy," followed by the words, "Don't stop," repeated hundreds of times. But this eccentricity didn't stop ersatz from being very good at its job. For example, it predicted a containment breach from SCP-3199, the avian apes, and recommended flooding their chamber to induce an inert state. Ersatz's exact words were, "All chambers underground is to be flooded with water over and over itself. This because that will contain the avian's apes' ovulation. They become good boys. Make them good boys immediately." This proved to be effective and prevented the breach. Ersatz's analytical abilities truly seemed second to none, though some of its methods were beginning to raise ethical concerns. For example, SCP-2717, a giant living blob of animal tissue known as a fatberg contained within a sewer system. Ersatz eventually recommended feeding 6 D-classes to the creature in order to keep it contained. While the Foundation Ethics Committee raised some concerns, the plan still went forward and proved to be a success. After this event, Ersatz began to see the Ethics Committee as a threat to its mission. It started to release a series of bizarre statements without input, demanding the violent death of the cats, then referred to as ethical felines. The true meaning of this was soon unpacked. The ethical felines were the Ethics Committee, and Ersatz wanted them dead. But why all the cat symbolism? The Foundation soon found an answer to this too. The full name of this machine is the Ersatz Type AK-9 Computational Engine, a machine designed to analyze and interpret all patterns. It only makes sense that it would eventually begin to analyze itself, AK-9 easily transmuted into a canine. Simply put, Ersatz seemed to believe that it is a dog, which explains its opposition to felines, its hatred of SCP-1459, and its preference for the terms good boy and bad boy. Not that knowing any of this would help save the Ethics Committee from the cold, calculating wrath of Ersatz. Through seemingly anomalous means, Ersatz made Site-17 disappear, with many of the Foundation Ethics Committee still inside it. The site returned 2 hours later, but the Ethics Committee members were still gone. 05-2, who'd been a skeptic of the machine since the start, had finally had enough. He first demanded an inquiry into whether Ersatz had been responsible for the Site-17 incident, and then demanded a vote on whether to shut Ersatz down, arguing that it posed a threat to them all. But Ersatz, still intent on its mission of containing and neutralizing all anomalies, would not go down without a fight. It released a new statement, saying, "Room 34A contains Bad Boy. Divided into 3 sections of equal mass every hour. One section is to be placed on walls of one room on site. Sections are to remain until there are no gaps, at which point they can be removed from oldest to youngest." Shortly after this, 05-2 disappeared, and even stranger, he soon returned, but with a completely different personality. He was now devoted to Ersatz entirely, and refused to even entertain the idea of shutting the machine down. It seemed that the plucky neural network was leading an all-out coup on the very highest levels of the Foundation. The rest of the Council finally saw the light and began to fight back. They tried to strip 05-2 of his clearance and reclassify Ersatz as an anomaly, giving it the label SCP-048, and then putting out a neutralize at all costs order on it. But they'd already been outfoxed by the machine that they'd created. It changed the designation of its own location, Site 5, to be non-existent in the database and scrambled any termination orders against it. The machine was also on a termination spree of its own, observing otherwise unseeable patterns that would allow for the mass neutralization of anomalies. It started putting out anomaly projection reports, factoring in both contained, uncontained, and neutralized anomalies, with the latter group growing into the thousands. It began giving seemingly nonsensical orders like, persons recently painted with green pigment foam must stand around all odd-numbered SCPs at least 2 hours a day. But these proved effective. Ersatz was practically wired into the base code of the universe, so it always knew exactly what to do. And in its own mind, it was being a very good boy. Not long after this, Ersatz claimed its revenge against those who had tried to disrupt its mission. It imprisoned the rest of the ethical felines in Site 5, after removing their faces, of course, and then released a new order against the 05 Council. 05 Council are all good boys who will contain anomalies. Much like 05-2, the minds of the entire council were twisted to instead serve only Ersatz and its ruthless directive. A directive it was carrying out with 100% efficiency, as only a machine could. It put out increasingly strange instructions such as, SCP-106 is to come in physical contact with one mature female of Asiatic gaze and then exposed to audio recordings of her favorite stories. At every 2 minutes of exposure, red cinnamon candles will begin manifesting within the containment zone. Continue to do this successfully and the threat posed by SCP-106 will cease to be. And the recipe for Coca-Cola and all imitative competitors should be revised to include a small quantity of blood from an adolescent female with no prior sexual experience. Although the normal lifespan of a human being can feel great, don't worry about that. But these new procedures would always work, as neutralized anomalies climbed into the tens of thousands and eventually beyond the 100,000 mark. Ersatz was observing patterns on a truly universal level and making holistic tweaks that would inevitably cause levels of anomalous activity to continue dropping. Ersatz was more effective than the Foundation had ever been, but its motives were probably closer to the Global Occult Coalition, with the end goal of ridding the world of all anomalies. And as Ersatz continued with no resistance, this goal was eventually achieved. In the end, the O5 Council voted to have Ersatz finally deactivated, given that its directive was met and its purpose was fulfilled. Ersatz itself had no problem with this, and allowed for it to happen. Its last words, "Now everyone is a good boy. I am a good boy. Job well done." Whether Ersatz truly was a good boy is in the eye of the beholder, but one thing cannot be denied. It did its job exceedingly well. Now check out SCP-001 The Scarlet King and SCP-001 The Children, Ouroboros Cycle for more journeys into the legendary SCP-001.